When Ethan Cole joked about marrying his best friend Lena at a bonfire party, he expected laughter. What he got instead was a quiet confession that shattered 7 years of friendship and exposed feelings neither of them was ready to face. Some words can't be taken back. Some truths, once spoken, demand an answer. This is the story of a man who made a careless joke and woke up to discover that the person he'd been looking for had been sitting beside him all along. If you stay until the end, you'll see how one reckless moment can rewrite 2 entire lives. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Ethan Cole had always believed that life was something you managed, not something you felt deeply about. At 32, he had constructed a world of comfortable predictability, a marketing analyst position at a mid-sized firm in Portland, a 2-bedroom apartment with hardwood floors that caught the afternoon sun just right, and a circle of friends who had remained remarkably constant since college. His life wasn't extraordinary, but it was his, and he had convinced himself that was enough. The April evening started like countless others before it. Jake's annual spring bonfire had become something of a tradition among their group, a weekend ritual that marked the official end of Portland's relentless rain and the beginning of something that almost resembled summer. The backyard sprawled behind Jake's rental house in southeast Portland, a square of patchy grass surrounded by a weathered fence that had seen better days. Someone had strung lights between the posts, creating a canopy of soft yellow that pushed back against the descending darkness. Ethan arrived just after 7, carrying a 6-pack of local IPA and wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn to the last 3 gatherings. Predictable, Sarah had once teased him. Reliable, he'd corrected. The distinction mattered to him, though he couldn't quite articulate why. Finally, Jake called out from his position near the fire pit, where flames were just beginning to catch on the carefully stacked logs. Thought maybe you'd bailed on us. Traffic on Hawthorne was a nightmare, Ethan replied, setting the beer down on the rickety folding table that served as their makeshift bar. Some kind of food cart festival. In Portland? Shocking. This came from Marcus, who was already on what appeared to be his second beer, based on the empties lined up beside his camping chair. What's next, a beard competition? The familiar rhythm of their banter settled over Ethan like a favorite sweater. This was his element, the space between close enough to matter and distant enough to stay safe. He grabbed a beer and claimed his usual spot, a camping chair positioned at a perfect angle to both see the fire and avoid the smoke when the wind shifted. Sarah arrived moments later with Tom in tow, both of them carrying bags of marshmallows and graham crackers that would inevitably be forgotten until someone remembered them hours later, after they'd all eaten too much pizza to care about s'mores. The group was expanding, filling in the familiar constellation of personalities that had orbited each other for nearly a decade. But Ethan's attention kept drifting toward the back door, waiting for the one person who could make even these comfortable gatherings feel different. Lena Brooks had been part of this circle for 7 years, ever since Jake had brought her to a Super Bowl party, introducing her as his co-worker from the design firm where he'd just started. She'd arrived wearing a jersey for a team that wasn't even playing, admitted she didn't understand football, and somehow ended up being the person everyone wanted to sit next to. Ethan remembered that first meeting with the kind of clarity that should have told him something important. Lena had settled onto the couch beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and citrusy that cut through the aroma of beer and chicken wings. When a particularly confusing play had unfolded on screen, she'd leaned toward him and whispered, "I have absolutely no idea what just happened, but everyone seems upset about it." "That's because it was a fumble," he'd explained, then spent the next 20 minutes breaking down the basic rules of football while everyone else shouted at the television. "You're patient," she'd said when the game cut to commercial. "Most people just tell me to Google it." "Most people are lazy teachers," he'd replied, and her smile had done something strange to his chest that he'd immediately dismissed as indigestion from too much buffalo sauce. 7 years later, that strange chest feeling had become such a constant presence that Ethan had learned to ignore it completely. Lena was his friend, one of his best friends, if he was being honest. She was the person who remembered his coffee order, who sent him articles about vintage motorcycles because she knew he harbored secret dreams of buying one, who showed up at his apartment with Thai food when his breakups inevitably failed. She was safe, familiar, untouchable. The back door opened and Lena stepped into the yard, backlit by the kitchen light in a way that seemed almost cinematic. She wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that hung off one shoulder. Her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot that suggested she hadn't spent much time thinking about it, but somehow looked perfect anyway. She carried a tray of what appeared to be homemade brownies, because of course she did. I know, she announced before anyone could comment. I'm late, but I brought chocolate peace offerings, so you have to forgive me. The group responded with the usual chorus of greetings and good-natured harassment about her chronic inability to arrive on time. Lena distributed hugs with the ease of someone who had long ago earned her place in this chosen family, then made her way around the fire to the empty chair beside Ethan. Scoot over, she said, even though there was plenty of room. It was their ritual. Her claiming the space next to him pretending to be put out by it, both of them settling into a proximity that would have felt intimate if it hadn't been so constant. You're blocking my view of the fire, Ethan complained, shifting his chair exactly 3 inches to the left. You're blocking my view of anything interesting, Lena countered, settling into her seat and immediately stealing his beer for a sip before handing it back. Get your own. I will. Eventually. She grinned at him, that familiar expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes and made something warm bloom in his chest. Indigestion, he reminded himself. Definitely indigestion. The evening unfolded with the comfortable chaos of people who had known each other long enough to drop their polite facades. Jake told increasingly questionable stories about his recent dating disasters. Sarah and Tom engaged in their usual affectionate bickering about whose turn it was to choose the next group movie night selection. Marcus appointed himself firemaster and took his role far too seriously, adjusting logs with the solemnity of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery. Ethan felt himself relaxing into the familiar rhythms, the beer smoothing the edges of his week, the warmth of the fire and the presence of his friends creating a bubble of contentment that felt both precious and fragile. Lena had pulled her chair closer as the temperature dropped, close enough that their elbows occasionally brushed. Each contact sent a small electric current through him that he steadfastly refused to acknowledge. Remember when Ethan tried to convince us all to go camping in the gorge? Jake said suddenly, apparently reminded of this humiliation by some connection only alcohol could forge. Oh God, Sarah laughed. Wasn't that the trip where it rained for 3 straight days? It was supposed to be sunny, Ethan defended himself. The weather report said sunny. The weather report lied, Marcus added helpfully. We spent 72 hours huddled in tents that leaked, eating cold hot dogs because someone, he pointed at Ethan, forgot the waterproof matches. I didn't forget them. They got wet. That's literally the one thing waterproof matches are designed not to do, Tom pointed out, which sparked another round of laughter. Lena had been quiet during this recounting, but now she leaned closer to Ethan, her voice low enough that only he could hear. For what it's worth, I had fun on that trip. He turned to look at her, surprised. You spent 3 days soaking wet and eating cold food. Yeah, but we played cards in your tent for like 6 hours straight, and you let me have the only dry sleeping bag. Her expression was soft, touched with memory. That was kind of you. The moment stretched between them, weighted with something Ethan couldn't quite name. He became acutely aware of how close she was, how the firelight caught in her eyes and turned them amber, how her shoulder pressed against his arm. You would have done the same, he said finally, breaking eye contact and taking a long pull from his beer. Maybe, she agreed, but her voice carried a note of something else, something that made his pulse quicken. The conversation flowed around them, moving from shared disasters to future plans to the kind of philosophical debates that only emerged after the 3rd or 4th round of drinks. Someone suggested they play Truth or Dare, an idea immediately shouted down by everyone over the age of 25. Someone else proposed a round of Never Have I Ever, which lasted exactly 3 questions before Marcus called it boring. We should play the newlywed game, Sarah suggested, her eyes bright with mischief. But with the whole group. See who actually knows each other best. That only works with couples, Tom pointed out. So we make couples. Sarah gestured broadly at the assembled group. Just pair off randomly. It'll be hilarious. I'm not answering questions about Jake's bathroom habits, Marcus said flatly. Your loss, Jake replied. I'm a fascinating individual. The pairing off happened with the kind of arbitrary randomness that alcohol encouraged. Sarah and Marcus, Jake and Tom, which left Ethan and Lena as the final pair, sitting side by side and exchanging glances that mixed amusement with something more uncertain. Perfect, Sarah declared, appointing herself game master. Okay, first question. If your partner could only eat one food for the rest of their life, what would it be? The game proceeded with the expected mix of surprising accuracy and comedic failure. Tom knew that Jake's answer would be pizza, but couldn't specify which kind, leading to a heated debate about whether toppings mattered in hypothetical scenarios. Marcus guessed correctly that Sarah would choose tacos, earning himself a high five and another beer. When the question came to Ethan and Lena, they answered simultaneously. Pad Thai with extra peanuts for her, a really good cheeseburger with bacon for him. The synchronicity earned applause from the group, and a strange flutter in Ethan's stomach that he tried to drown with another sip of beer. The questions continued, each one revealing the small intimacies of long friendship. Favorite movies, worst fears, secret talents, childhood dreams. Ethan found himself surprised by how much he knew about Lena, and how much she knew about him. They had accumulated each other in small increments, year after year, building a foundation of understanding that went deeper than he'd realized. Okay, Sarah said, clearly enjoying her role far too much. Last question, and it's a big one. She paused for dramatic effect. If you had to marry someone in this group, like gun to your head, forced marriage situation, who would you pick and why? The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of awkward laughter around the circle. Jake immediately chose Tom, citing his excellent credit score and ability to cook. Tom reciprocated, adding that Jake's Netflix password sharing sealed the deal. Sarah and Marcus engaged in elaborate negotiation about division of household duties before agreeing they could probably make it work. Then all eyes turned to Ethan and Lena. The beer had made Ethan loose, comfortable in a way that dulled his usual careful consideration of consequences. The fire crackled between them and the rest of the group, creating a sense of separation, of being in their own small world. Lena was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, half amused, half something else. Later, he would replay this moment 1,000 times, wondering what instinct had driven him to speak. Whether it was the alcohol, the intimacy of the evening, or some deeper truth finally forcing its way to the surface. But in that moment, he simply spoke without thinking. That's easy, Ethan said, gesturing toward Lena with his beer bottle. I'd marry Lena. We already know each other's annoying habits, she's got good health insurance through her company, and she makes a mean breakfast burrito. Plus, we've basically been platonically married for years anyway. Might as well make it official. He delivered the lines like a stand-up routine, expecting the laugh, expecting the moment to dissolve into the comfortable absurdity that had characterized the entire evening. Around the fire, their friends did laugh, the kind of knowing chuckle that acknowledged the truth wrapped in the joke. But Lena didn't laugh. She went very still beside him, her beer bottle frozen halfway to her lips. In the firelight, Ethan watched something shift in her expression, a crack appearing in the careful facade she'd maintained for 7 years. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the crackle of burning wood. What if I said yes? The words hung in the air between them, impossibly heavy. Around the fire, the laughter died away, replaced by a silence that felt suddenly suffocating. Ethan's heart stuttered in his chest, his mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. What? The word came out strangled, uncertain. Lena set her beer down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. When she looked at him, her eyes held something raw and vulnerable that made his breath catch. What if I said yes, Ethan? What if I've been waiting for you to see me, really see me, for 7 years? What would you do then? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ethan was aware of their friends frozen in various states of shock around the fire, of Jake's eyes wide with surprise, of Sarah's hand covering her mouth. But most of all, he was aware of Lena. Lena, who was looking at him with her entire heart exposed, who had just taken the careless joke he'd thrown into the night and turned it into something terrifyingly real. Lena, he started, but she shook her head. No, you don't get to joke your way out of this one. Her voice was steady now, gaining strength. You said we've been platonically married for years. Do you have any idea how that sounds to someone who stopped being platonic about you a long time ago? Ethan's mouth opened and closed, words failing him completely. His carefully constructed world of comfortable predictability was crumbling around him, rebuilt in an instant into something unrecognizable. Lena, funny, patient, familiar Lena, was looking at him like he held the answer to a question she'd been too afraid to ask. He struggled to find solid ground. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was terrified. The admission came out fierce and honest. Because you're my best friend, and I couldn't risk losing you. Because every woman you've dated for the past 7 years has been exactly like me, except not me. And I kept thinking maybe that meant something, or maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see. She paused, taking a shaky breath. And because I thought maybe if I waited long enough, you'd figure it out on your own. The fire popped loudly, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. Ethan felt like he was falling, the ground rushing up to meet him, except he was still sitting perfectly still in his camping chair with a beer growing warm in his hand, and his entire understanding of his life rearranging itself in real time. 7 years of moments began replaying in his mind with new context. Lena showing up at his apartment with soup when he had the flu, staying to make sure he actually ate it. The way she always saved him a seat at group gatherings. Her careful interest in his hobbies, learning about vintage motorcycles and classic movies, not because she cared about them, but because he did. The women he'd dated, Rebecca with her dark hair and easy laugh, Jessica who worked in graphic design, Amanda who made him coffee every morning exactly the way he liked it. All of them variations on a theme he'd been too blind to recognize. All of them almost Lena, but not quite. Oh my God, he breathed, the realization hitting him like a physical force. Oh my God, I'm an idiot. Took you long enough, Marcus muttered from across the fire, earning himself an elbow from Sarah. But Ethan barely heard them. He was looking at Lena, really looking at her for what felt like the first time, seeing not just his friend, his comfortable companion, his safe harbor, but a woman who had been bravely, quietly, impossibly in love with him while he'd been too comfortable to notice. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice rough. You don't have to say anything right now. Lena stood up, and Ethan felt a spike of panic at the thought of her leaving. I've had 7 years to think about this. You've had about 90 seconds. That's not fair to you. Lena, wait. She held up a hand, stopping him. I'm not running away. I'm just giving you space to think. Her smile was shaky but genuine. I've already put my cards on the table. Now you need to decide what you want to do with them. She turned and walked toward the house, her figure disappearing through the back door and leaving Ethan sitting in the wreckage of everything he thought he knew. The silence around the fire was absolute, broken only by the crackling flames and the distant sound of traffic from the street. Finally, Jake cleared his throat. So that was unexpected. Was it, though? Sarah asked quietly. Really? Ethan looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean, we've all known for years that Lena had feelings for you, Sarah said gently. We thought you knew too, and we're just, I don't know, choosing to ignore it or waiting for the right time. Everyone knew? Ethan's voice pitched higher with disbelief. Everyone except you, apparently, Tom confirmed. It wasn't exactly subtle, man. The way she looks at you, the way she always... He gestured vaguely. Everything. All of it. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair nearly tipping backward. I don't know what I need. His hands shook as he ran them through his hair. This is insane. This is Lena. We're friends. We're just friends. Are you? Marcus asked, his tone surprisingly gentle for someone who usually communicated primarily through sarcasm. Be honest with yourself, Ethan. When Rebecca broke up with you last year, who did you call? Lena, Ethan answered automatically. When you got that promotion at work, who was the first person you wanted to tell? Lena? When you think about your future, not like dating or romance or any of that shit, but just your actual day-to-day life, who's in it? Ethan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Because the truth was sitting in his chest like a weight, undeniable and terrifying. Every version of his future he'd ever imagined included Lena. Standing beside him at family dinners, sitting next to him at movies, being the person he came home to at the end of long days. He'd just never examined too closely why that was, or what it meant. "I need to think," he said finally. I'm going home." He left the fire still burning, his beer sitting abandoned on the arm of his chair, his friends calling after him with concern he barely registered. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and stop signs, his mind too full of Lena's words to focus on anything as mundane as traffic laws. "What if I've been waiting for you to see me, really see me, for 7 years?" He parked in his apartment complex's lot and sat in his car for a long time, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from Jake, from Sarah, from Marcus, but he ignored them all. The only message he wanted wasn't coming, because Lena had said she was giving him space, and Lena always kept her word. Finally, he made his way up to his apartment, the familiar space feeling strange and foreign in the wake of the evening's revelations. He stood in his living room, taking in the details he'd stopped noticing through repetition. The throw pillows Lena had insisted he needed because your couch looks sad without them. The coffee table book about motorcycle restoration she'd given him for his birthday. The small succulents lined up on the windowsill. Her contribution after she'd declared his apartment aggressively plant-free and taken it upon herself to remedy the situation. Evidence of her presence was everywhere, woven so thoroughly into the fabric of his life that he'd stopped seeing it as separate from everything else. She hadn't just been his friend. She'd been building a home in his space, in his routines, in his heart, and he'd been too comfortable, too convinced of his own carefully maintained boundaries to recognize it. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through their text history. Months of conversation flowed past, good morning messages, random thoughts, shared jokes, check-ins about each other's days. The kind of constant, casual communication that implied something far deeper than friendship. How had he missed this? How had he convinced himself that this was normal, that everyone had a friend they talked to this much, thought about this often? His thumb hovered over her name, the urge to call her nearly overwhelming. But she'd asked for space to let him think, and he owed her that much. Owed her the respect of actually examining what he felt instead of reacting out of panic or confusion. Ethan lay awake most of the night, staring at his ceiling and replaying 7 years of friendship through a new lens. Every moment took on different weight, different meaning. The way she'd cried when he told her about his father's death, showing up at his apartment at 6 in the morning with coffee and sitting with him in silence because she knew he needed presence more than words. The road trip they'd taken to Seattle, just the two of them, singing off-key to terrible radio stations and stopping at every weird roadside attraction they passed. The time she'd called him at midnight, heartbroken over some guy who didn't deserve her. And he'd stayed on the phone with her until dawn, feeling a rage toward the stranger who'd hurt her that seemed disproportionate for just a friend. His phone screen glowed in the darkness, 3:47 a.m. In a few hours, he'd have to face his normal Saturday routine, grocery shopping, gym, meal prep for the week. The comfortable predictability that had always felt like security now felt like a cage he'd built himself, brick by careful brick, keeping out anything that might disrupt his controlled existence, including, apparently, the possibility of loving someone who had been right beside him all along. The thought sent a spike of fear through his chest. Love. He'd been in love before, or thought he had. There had been Caroline in college who'd broken his heart so thoroughly he'd sworn off serious relationships for 2 years. There had been a string of girlfriends since then, each relationship following the same pattern. Initial excitement, comfortable settling, gradual realization that something essential was missing, eventual quiet ending. He thought he was being careful, protecting himself, waiting for something real. What if real had been waiting for him too, patient and quiet and content to stay in the spaces he'd assigned her, until a careless joke had forced the truth into the open? Ethan's alarm went off at 7, pulling him from the shallow sleep he'd finally fallen into. He silenced it and lay there for a moment, feeling the weight of exhaustion and emotion pressing down on him. His phone showed 3 new messages, all from Sarah, who apparently had appointed herself mediator in this situation. "Don't freak out," the first one read. "Okay, freak out a little, but then actually deal with this," said the second. "She's at home. She's fine. She doesn't expect you to have all the answers immediately, but she does deserve your honesty. whatever that honesty is. The last message hit him hardest because it cut through his spiraling thoughts to the essential truth. Lena deserved his honesty. After 7 years of friendship, after having the courage to expose her heart last night, she deserved more than him hiding in his apartment, too afraid to examine his own feelings. He showered, letting the hot water pound against his shoulders while he tried to organize his thoughts. The truth was, he was terrified. Terrified of change, of disrupting the comfortable life he'd built, of losing Lena if he couldn't figure out how to give her what she needed. But beneath that fear was something else, a growing certainty that felt like waking up from a long sleep. By the time he dressed and made coffee, the sun was fully up, painting his apartment in shades of gold that seemed almost optimistic. Ethan sat at his kitchen counter, staring at his phone and trying to compose a message that could possibly encompass everything he was feeling. Finally, he gave up on words and simply typed, "Can we talk?" Her response came 3 minutes later, each minute an eternity. "Coffee shop on Belmont? 1 hour?" "I'll be there," he replied. The coffee shop was one of their regular spots, a small independent place that roasted its own beans and had a back patio with mismatched chairs and tables. Ethan arrived 15 minutes early, claiming their usual table in the corner and ordering Lena's drink, a vanilla latte with an extra shot, before he could second-guess the presumption. When she walked through the door, his heart did something complicated in his chest. She looked tired, like maybe she hadn't slept much either, but she'd still taken time with her appearance. A soft gray sweater, jeans, her hair down and loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, and the thought that he'd been seeing her for years without really seeing her made something ache deep in his ribs. "Hi," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Her eyes found the latte he'd ordered, and something flickered in her expression. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "Lena, I remember everything about you." She wrapped her hands around the cup, not drinking, just holding it like an anchor. "I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean to ambush you like that. The question and the joke, and I couldn't keep pretending anymore." "Don't apologize." Ethan leaned forward, desperate to make her understand. "Don't you dare apologize for being honest with me. I'm the one who should be sorry. For being so blind, for taking you for granted, for making you wait 7 years for me to pull my head out of my—" He caught himself modulating his language in the public space. "For 7 years of being an idiot." A small smile tugged at her lips. "You're not an idiot. You're careful. There's a difference." Careful to the point of blindness, apparently. He paused, trying to find the right words. "I've been thinking all night. About us. About the past 7 years. About every moment I convinced myself was just friendship when it was clearly something more." Lena's hands tightened on her cup. And I'm terrified," he admitted. "You're my best friend, Lena. You're the person I trust most in the world. The thought of risking that, of potentially losing you if this doesn't work—" He had to stop, his throat tight with emotion. "I know," she said softly. "I've been living with that fear for 7 years. Every day, choosing to be your friend and swallowing down everything else because having you in my life was better than not having you at all." The confession made his chest ache. "How did you do it? How did you stand it?" "Because I love you." She said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And sometimes love means being patient. It means showing up and being present and hoping that someday the person you love will see you the way you see them. Ethan reached across the table, covering her hands with his. Her skin was warm from the coffee cup, soft and familiar and suddenly electric. "I see you now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see you, and I can't believe I was blind for so long." "That's not an answer," Lena pointed out, but her hands turned in his, fingers tangling together. "Seeing me and wanting to do something about it are two different things." She was right, and they both knew it. Acknowledgement wasn't enough. Understanding the past didn't dictate the future. Ethan had to make a choice, to step forward into uncertainty or retreat back into the safe boundaries of friendship. He thought about his apartment, full of evidence of her presence, about the future he'd always imagined with her in it, about the way his heart had stuttered when she'd walked through the coffee shop door, about 7 years of almost relationships that had failed because they weren't her. I want to try, he said finally, the words feeling both terrifying and right. I don't know if I can promise it'll work. I don't know if I'll be good at this, at us being something more than what we've been. But I know that not trying, going back to pretending I don't feel something for you, would be the biggest mistake of my life. Lena's eyes filled with tears, though she was smiling. That's quite possibly the most terrified declaration of interest I've ever heard. I'm a work in progress, he managed, smiling back despite the emotion clogging his throat. You're honest. That's all I need. She squeezed his hands. We don't have to figure it all out right now. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to be willing to try. Together, Ethan agreed. Together, she confirmed. They sat there for a long moment, hands linked across the table, the morning sun streaming through the window and painting everything gold. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with weekend activity, couples reading newspapers, students hunched over laptops, the hiss and gurgle of the espresso machine. Normal life continuing while everything fundamental shifted. When they finally left, stepping out into the spring morning, Ethan felt like the world had tilted slightly on its axis and then settled into a new position. Lena's hand found his as they walked toward where they'd parked, and he marveled at how something so simple could feel so monumental. So what happens now? She asked, echoing the question that had been running through his mind. I don't know, he admitted. What's the protocol for best friends who decide to try being something more? I think we make it up as we go. Lena stopped walking, turning to face him fully. In the morning light, she looked both impossibly beautiful and heartbreakingly vulnerable. But maybe we start with an actual date? No friends, no group dynamics, just you and me figuring out what this looks like. A date, Ethan repeated, testing the word. It felt strange and exciting and terrifying all at once. When? How about tonight? If you're not too terrified to commit to something 12 hours in advance. He laughed, the sound surprising him. Some of the tension in his chest eased. Tonight. I can do tonight. Good. She rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, a gesture she'd done 100 times before that suddenly meant something entirely different. Pick me up at 7. And Ethan? Yeah? Don't bring flowers or do the whole formal date thing. Just be you. That's all I've ever wanted. She walked away toward her car, leaving him standing on the sidewalk with his hand pressed to his cheek, where her lips had touched, his heart hammering against his ribs, and the strange sensation that his life had just fundamentally changed direction. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxious energy. Ethan cleaned his apartment, even though they wouldn't be there. He changed clothes 4 times before settling on jeans and a button-down shirt that Lena had once said brought out his eyes. He paced. He checked his phone. He paced some more. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, he'd worked himself into such a state of nervous anticipation that his hands were actually shaking as he knocked on Lena's apartment door. She answered immediately, like maybe she'd been waiting on the other side. She wore a simple black dress that he'd never seen before, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked like Lena, familiar, comfortable, home, but also like someone new, someone he was just beginning to know. Hi, she said, her smile tentative. Hi, he echoed, and then they were both laughing at the absurdity of being nervous with each other after 7 years of easy companionship. This is weird, right? Lena asked, grabbing her jacket. It's okay that this is weird? It's definitely weird, Ethan agreed, feeling some of his tension ease, but maybe weird is okay. They ended up at a small Italian restaurant in northwest Portland, the kind of place they'd been to together a dozen times before. But everything felt different now, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Ethan found himself noticing details he'd never paid attention to. The way Lena tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the particular shade of her eyes in candlelight, the graceful movement of her hands as she talked. You're staring, she said, amusement coloring her voice. I'm allowed to stare now, he countered. That's part of the whole dating thing, right? Staring is acceptable? Within reason. She took a sip of wine, studying him over the rim of her glass. Are you okay? You seem tense. I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up, he admitted, that I'll say the wrong thing or do something stupid and ruin everything. Ethan. She set down her glass and reached across the table for his hand. We've been friends for 7 years. You've already said and done plenty of stupid things around me. That's not going to change just because we're on a date. Thanks for the vote of confidence. What I mean is, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to perform being someone you're not. I already know who you are, remember? The good parts and the annoying parts and all the weird quirks in between. The words settled over him like a warm blanket, easing some of the anxious knots in his chest. She was right. This wasn't about impressing a stranger or putting his best foot forward. This was about being honest, with her and with himself, about what he felt and what he wanted. Can I tell you something? Ethan asked, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. Always. I'm not just terrified of messing this up. I'm terrified of how much I want this. How much I want you. The confession tumbled out, raw and honest. Last night, when you said you'd been waiting for me to see you, it was like someone turned on a light in a room I didn't even know was dark. And now I can't stop seeing you, can't stop wondering how I missed it for so long. Lena's expression softened, her fingers tightening around his. You didn't miss it. You just weren't ready to see it yet. And now? Now you're here. That's what matters. They talked through dinner, through dessert, through 2 more glasses of wine than either of them had planned. The conversation flowed with the ease of 7 years of friendship, but underneath it ran a current of something new. Awareness, attraction, possibility. When Lena laughed at one of his stories, Ethan felt it in his chest like sunshine breaking through clouds. When her knee brushed his under the table, electricity shot through him. By the time they left the restaurant, night had fully fallen, the city lights painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. They walked slowly toward where Ethan had parked, neither of them quite ready for the evening to end. Thank you for tonight, Lena said as they reached his car, for being brave enough to try. I should be thanking you, Ethan replied, for being patient enough to wait. They stood in the pool of light from a street lamp, facing each other. The moment stretched between them, weighted with 7 years of history and the fragile promise of something new. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped closer, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin in a gesture that was both brand new and somehow familiar. Is this okay? He whispered. It's perfect, she breathed. And then they were closing the distance between them, lips meeting in a kiss that felt like coming home and stepping into the unknown all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Ethan pressed his forehead against hers. I'm in trouble, he murmured. Why? Because I think I've been halfway in love with you for years and just too stubborn to admit it. Lena's laugh was soft and warm against his lips. Only halfway. Working on the other half, he promised, and kissed her again to prove it. The days that followed their first kiss existed in a strange liminal space between the friendship they'd always known and the relationship they were tentatively building. Ethan found himself navigating territory that should have felt foreign, but somehow didn't. Except when it absolutely did, usually at the most inconvenient moments. Monday morning arrived with the usual demands of work and routine, but everything felt slightly off-kilter. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense, his mind replaying the feeling of Lena's lips against his for what had to be the 100th time. His phone buzzed with a text, and his heart did that stupid flutter thing it had been doing all weekend. How's your Monday going? Lena's message read, followed by a coffee cup emoji. He smiled despite himself, typing back, Better now? You? Pretending to pay attention in a meeting, thinking about Saturday instead. Same. Minus the meeting part. What are you thinking about specifically? Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. They'd texted like this 1,000 times before, but now every message felt weighted with new meaning. The way you laughed when I spilled wine on myself. Very compassionate of you. I offered you my napkin after you finished laughing. Priorities. There was a pause, then, I'm thinking about the kiss. The directness of it made his breath catch. Which one? All of them. They'd kissed 4 times on Saturday night. Once outside the restaurant, once when he'd walked her to her door, once when she'd invited him in for coffee that neither of them drank, and once more at midnight when he'd finally forced himself to leave, both of them clinging to each other in her doorway like teenagers. "Me too," he typed, then added, "When can I see you again?" "Eager much." "Is that bad?" "It's perfect." "Tomorrow night?" "Unless that's too soon and I'm being clingy. Tomorrow's great. Your place or mine?" "Yours. I'll bring dinner." Ethan pocketed his phone, trying to refocus on work and failing spectacularly. Across the office, his coworker Dennis shot him a curious look. "You okay, Cole? You've been staring at that same cell for like 10 minutes. "Fine," Ethan said quickly. "Just thinking." "About whatever's got you smiling like an idiot?" Was he smiling? Ethan touched his face, surprised to find Dennis was right. "Maybe." "New girlfriend?" The word landed strangely. Girlfriend. Was that what Lena was now? They hadn't discussed labels, hadn't defined what they were doing beyond trying, but the thought of calling her his girlfriend sent a warm rush through his chest that felt a lot like happiness mixed with terror. "Something like that," he said finally, and Dennis laughed, returning to his own work. The rest of Monday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ethan found himself watching the clock, counting down hours until he could see Lena again, then feeling ridiculous for being so eager. They'd just seen each other. They'd been seeing each other regularly for 7 years. This shouldn't feel so consuming. Except it did, because everything was different now. Every interaction carried new weight, every touch, every glance, every word existed in this strange new context where friendship was transforming into something deeper, and he was desperately trying not to screw it up. Tuesday evening found him cleaning his apartment with more thoroughness than it had seen in months. He changed his sheets, did the dishes, even lit a candle that Sarah had given him as a housewarming gift 2 years ago and that he'd never used. Then he blew it out, worried it seemed too presumptuous, then lit it again because his apartment smelled like old takeout. Lena arrived at 7 carrying bags of Thai food and wearing a smile that made his heart stutter. "Hi," she said, and just like at the restaurant, they both laughed at the absurdity of being nervous. "Hi," he echoed, taking the food and trying not to obsess over the way her fingers brushed his. "Come in." She stepped into his apartment with the ease of someone who'd been there countless times before, but her eyes scanned the space like she was seeing it new. "Did you clean?" "Maybe." "And is that a candle?" "Sarah gave it to me. 2 years ago, I was there." Lena's expression was fond and amused. "You're trying very hard. Is that bad?" She stepped closer, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "It's sweet. But you know you don't have to impress me, right? I've seen your apartment when it's actually messy. I know you own exactly 3 plates and eat cereal for dinner more often than any adult should." 4 plates, he corrected. "I bought a new one last month." "Living dangerously." She took the food from his hands and headed toward the kitchen. "Come on, this is getting cold." They fell into familiar rhythms. Lena unpacking containers while Ethan grabbed plates and utensils, both of them moving around each other with the practiced ease of years. But now every casual touch felt electric. When she reached past him for a serving spoon, her arm brushed his and he felt it everywhere. When he handed her a glass of water, their fingers lingered together longer than necessary. They settled on the couch with their food, close enough that their knees touched. Lena had queued up one of their favorite shows, a British comedy they'd been watching together for months. But Ethan found it impossible to focus on the screen when he was hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. "You're not watching," Lena observed, glancing at him. "I'm distracted." "By?" "You." The honesty felt both terrifying and necessary. "I can't stop thinking about how close you are. How I could just lean over and kiss you. How I've sat next to you on this couch 100 times and never let myself think about what it would be like to—" He cut himself off, suddenly self-conscious. "To what?" Her voice had gone soft, her food forgotten. "To do this." He set his plate aside and turned to face her fully, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "To touch you like this. To kiss you like I've been wanting to do since you walked through the door." "Then why haven't you?" The challenge in her eyes was gentle but real. Instead of answering, Ethan closed the distance between them, capturing her lips with his. Lena made a soft sound of surprise that melted into something else as she kissed him back, her hands sliding into his hair. The kiss deepened, 7 years of unacknowledged want pouring into the contact, and Ethan felt like he was falling and flying all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena's eyes were dark and her lips were swollen, and Ethan had never wanted anything more than he wanted to kiss her again. "We should probably eat," she said, though she made no move to pull away. "Probably," he agreed, equally still. They looked at each other for a long moment, then both started laughing, the kind of breathless, giddy laughter that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with happiness. "This is insane," Lena said, resting her forehead against his. "We're insane. Completely." Ethan pressed a kiss to her nose. "But I don't want to stop." "Good, because neither do I." They did eventually eat, though the food had gone lukewarm. The show played on, unwatched, while they talked about everything and nothing, the way they always had, but with the added dimension of casual touches and stolen kisses. Ethan's hand found its way to Lena's knee. Her head rested on his shoulder. His fingers played with her hair. Each small intimacy felt momentous and natural, all at once. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said during a lull in conversation. "Anything." "What changed? I mean, I know about the joke at the bonfire and my confession and all of that, but what actually changed for you? When did you stop thinking of me as just your friend?" The question deserved honesty, even if the answer was complicated. Ethan thought about it, trying to trace the shift in his feelings back to a single moment, but the truth was messier than that. "I don't think it was one moment," he said slowly. "I think it was all of them. Every time I called you first with good news or bad. Every time I compared the women I dated to you and found them lacking. Every time I imagined my future and you were automatically in it." He paused, gathering courage. "I think I've been falling for you in increments for years, but I was too comfortable to recognize it, or maybe too scared to acknowledge what it meant." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you, of disrupting what we had, of finding out that I wasn't capable of being what you needed." The admission cost him, but Lena deserved the truth. It's still scary, being this vulnerable with someone, knowing they have the power to hurt you in ways no one else can. "I know," she said softly. "I've been living with that fear for 7 years. Every time you started dating someone else, every time you told me about a date or a relationship, I had to smile and be supportive while my heart broke a little. But I did it because having you in my life, even if it wasn't the way I wanted, was better than not having you at all." The pain in her voice made his chest ache. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For being blind. For making you wait. For every moment I hurt you without knowing it." "Don't be sorry." She turned to look at him directly, her eyes serious. "You weren't ready, and if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I was either. I had to grow into the kind of person who could ask for what I wanted instead of just waiting for it to happen." The Lena from 3 years ago wouldn't have had the courage to say what I said at the bonfire. "What changed?" "Therapy helped," she admitted with a small laugh. "And watching you date Rebecca was this wake-up call. She was so much like me, the way she laughed, her interests, even her job. It was like watching you try to find me in someone else, and I realized I couldn't keep waiting for you to connect the dots. I had to either speak up or let go." "I'm glad you spoke up." "Even though it scared you?" "Especially because it scared me. I needed someone to push me out of my comfort zone." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. "I spent so long building these walls, convincing myself that safe and comfortable was the same thing as happy. You made me see the difference." They talked until midnight, unpacking 7 years of friendship and the complicated emotions that had always lurked beneath the surface. Ethan learned things he'd never known. How Lena had almost confessed her feelings after his breakup with Rebecca, but lost her nerve at the last minute. How she'd deliberately kept her distance whenever he started dating someone new, not out of pettiness, but out of self-preservation. How many times she'd practiced what she might say if she ever found the courage to tell him the truth. "I had this whole speech planned," she told him, her voice thick with remembered emotion. "I was going to take you to that overlook on Mount Tabor, the one we went to after your dad died. I was going to tell you everything, how long I'd felt this way, why I'd waited, what I hoped might be possible between us." She laughed softly. Instead, I blurted it out at a bonfire in response to a joke. So much for planning. I like the way it happened, Ethan said. It was honest, raw. It didn't give me time to build up my defenses and rationalize my way out of feeling something real. Do you really think you would have done that? I know I would have. I'm excellent at talking myself out of things that scare me. And this scares you. It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. Terrifies me. You terrify me. Not because of who you are, but because of how much I feel. How much I have to lose if I mess this up. Lena shifted position, straddling his lap so she could look directly into his eyes. The sudden proximity made his breath catch, but he forced himself to stay present, to meet her gaze without flinching. Listen to me very carefully, she said, her hands framing his face. You cannot mess this up by being honest about what you're feeling. You cannot mess this up by being scared or uncertain or figuring things out as you go. The only way you can mess this up is by running away from it instead of running toward it. I'm not running. I know, that's why we're going to be okay. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, gentle and grounding. We've been best friends for 7 years. We know how to communicate, how to fight fair, how to be there for each other. That doesn't disappear just because we're adding romance to the mix. Adding romance, Ethan repeated, a smile tugging at his lips despite the heavy conversation. That's one way to put it. What would you call it? Completely upending my entire understanding of my life while simultaneously feeling like the most natural thing in the world. Bit wordy, but accurate. She kissed him again, this time on the lips, soft and sweet and full of promise. I should probably go. It's late and we both have work tomorrow. Ethan's arms tightened around her waist reflexively. Or you could stay. The words hung between them, weighted with implication. Lena's eyes searched his, looking for certainty. Are you sure we don't have to rush anything? Shh. I'm not trying to rush. He struggled to articulate the feeling. I don't want tonight to end. And you've fallen asleep on this couch more times than I can count anyway. This wouldn't be that different. It would be completely different, and you know it. She was right. Everything was different now. But Ethan found he didn't care about maintaining old boundaries when new possibilities felt so right. Stay anyway, he said. Please. Lena studied him for another long moment, then nodded. Okay. But I'm stealing one of your t-shirts and you're making me breakfast. Deal. The domesticity of getting ready for bed together should have felt awkward. Lena borrowing his clothes, both of them brushing their teeth side by side in his bathroom, the negotiation of which side of the bed each would take. But instead it felt easy, natural, like a routine they'd practiced for years, finally being acknowledged for what it really was. Ethan lay in the darkness with Lena curled against his side, her head on his chest and her breathing gradually evening out into sleep. The candle he'd lit earlier had burned down to nothing. Outside, Portland's nighttime sounds drifted through his window. Distant traffic, someone's music playing, the soft patter of rain that had started sometime after midnight. This was what he'd been missing, he realized. Not the grand gestures or passionate declarations. Just this, the quiet intimacy of sharing space with someone who knew him completely and chose to stay anyway. The comfort of having someone to come home to wake up beside, to build a life with in small increments that somehow added up to everything. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Jake that he ignored. Tomorrow would bring questions from their friends, awkward conversations about what they were now, decisions about how to navigate this shift in their entire social dynamic. But tonight was just theirs, contained and perfect in its simplicity. Lena stirred against him, making a soft sound of contentment in her sleep. Ethan pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for as long as he could remember. I love you, he whispered, so quietly he barely heard himself. The words were easier to say when she couldn't hear them, when there was no pressure for response or reciprocation. They were just truth, simple and undeniable, hanging in the darkness of his bedroom. Tomorrow he might have the courage to say them when she was awake, or maybe the day after that, or the day after that. But knowing the words existed inside him, real and growing stronger with each moment they spent together, was enough for now. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through his bedroom curtains, and the disorienting realization that he wasn't alone. Ethan woke to find Lena still curled against him, her dark hair spread across his pillow and her hand resting over his heart. He held very still, not wanting to wake her, content to just watch her sleep and marvel at the strangeness of having something he'd always wanted but never let himself acknowledge. Her eyes fluttered open eventually, focusing on him with sleepy confusion that quickly cleared into a smile. "Hi," she murmured. "Hi," he replied, the word becoming their private joke, their way of acknowledging the sweet awkwardness of new intimacy. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months." It was true. His usual restless nights had given way to deep, dreamless sleep. "You?" "Perfectly." She stretched against him, cat-like and unself-conscious. "You're comfortable. I might keep you." "Might?" "Still evaluating. The breakfast you promised will be a determining factor." Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him with its ease. "No pressure, then." They made breakfast together. Scrambled eggs and toast and coffee strong enough to cut through the slight fog of too little sleep. Lena moved around his kitchen like she'd always belonged there, which technically she had, but now he noticed it differently. Noticed the way she knew where he kept the butter, how she automatically made his coffee the way he liked it, how they navigated around each other without needing to speak. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching him staring. "How we've been doing this for years and I never paid attention." "Doing what?" "This." He gestured between them. "Moving together. Knowing what the other needs without asking. Being domestic." Lena set down her coffee mug, her expression turning serious. "Ethan, we need to talk about something." His stomach clenched. Nothing good ever started with those words. "Okay. Our friends." She said it gently, but the weight of the topic was clear. "We need to figure out how to tell them, what we're going to say, how we're going to navigate this." "They already know we're trying," he pointed out. They were there when everything changed. They know we acknowledged feelings. They don't know we're actually together now. They don't know you stayed over last night, or that we've been texting constantly, or that we're... She paused, searching for words. "We need to decide what we are before we can tell other people." The question sat between them, unavoidable. What were they? Dating felt too casual for 7 years of history. Friends with benefits diminished what they meant to each other. Boyfriend and girlfriend felt simultaneously too formal and not formal enough. "What do you want us to be?" Ethan asked. "I want us to be real," Lena said simply. "I want to be able to hold your hand in public and call you my boyfriend and not have to hide how I feel about you anymore. But I also want to make sure you're ready for that. For people knowing, for the questions, for the way it changes the dynamic of our entire friend group. It's going to change things no matter what," he said. "Even if we tried to keep it quiet, which I don't want to do for the record, everyone would know something was different." "So what do we tell them?" Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. "The truth. That you had the courage to say what I was too blind to see. That I'm trying to be brave enough to deserve that courage. That we're together, and we're figuring it out as we go, and we'd appreciate everyone not being weird about it." "They're absolutely going to be weird about it." "Oh, completely. Sarah's probably already planning our wedding." Lena laughed, but there was nervousness in it. "This is actually happening, isn't it? We're really doing this." "Having second thoughts?" "Never. But maybe third and fourth and fifth thoughts about whether I'm dreaming." She squeezed his hand. "I've imagined this for so long that having it actually be real feels surreal." "I know what you mean." Ethan stood, moving around the table to pull her into his arms. "But I promise you're awake. And I promise I'm here. And I promise that whatever comes next, we'll handle it together." She tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her with the kind of certainty he was learning to trust. This was real. They were real. Everything else would figure itself out. His phone rang, shattering the moment. Jake's name flashed on the screen, and Ethan groaned. "I should probably answer this." "Probably," Lena agreed, stepping back. "He's called you 4 times since yesterday." Ethan picked up the phone. "Hey, Jake." "Finally. I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. Are you okay? Is Lena okay? Did you two talk? What happened after the bonfire? Sarah's been freaking out and..." "Jake, breathe." "I will breathe when you tell me what's going on." Ethan looked at Lena, who nodded encouragingly. We're together. Lena and I. We talked, we figured some things out, and we're giving this a real shot. The silence on the other end stretched so long that Ethan checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Jake? Sorry, I'm just processing. You and Lena, together. Like, actually together? Yes. Holy shit. I mean, I knew there were feelings, but I kind of thought you'd panic and run away. I considered it, Ethan admitted, but running seemed counterproductive. Wow. I'm happy for you guys, really happy. Also completely shocked, but mostly happy. Jake paused. Does this mean you're coming to game night on Friday? Probably. Good, because everyone's going to want details. Fair warning, Sarah's already told half of Portland, so prepare for intense scrutiny. Great, Ethan said dryly. Looking forward to it. They talked for a few more minutes, Jake extracting promises that Ethan would answer his phone more regularly and wouldn't do anything stupid to mess this up. When he finally hung up, Lena was watching him with amusement. That went well, she observed. Jake's already planning our bachelor party, I'm sure. At least we're consistent. He planned everyone's major life events. The casual mention of major life events sent a small thrill through Ethan's chest. This was major. What they were building together, the foundation they'd already laid over 7 years of friendship, it had the weight and substance of something that could last. Something that could become everything. The thought should have terrified him. A week ago, it would have. But standing in his kitchen with morning sunlight painting everything gold and Lena smiling at him like he'd hung the moon, Ethan found he wasn't scared at all. He was hopeful. And that felt like the biggest change of all. Friday night arrived with the inevitability of a reckoning. Ethan stood outside Jake's house for the second time in a week, but this time Lena's hand was firmly clasped in his. Her fingers interlaced with his own in a way that declared everything without words. The nervous energy radiating from both of them was palpable. We could just run, Lena suggested, only half joking. Move to Canada, start new lives, never face the interrogation waiting on the other side of that door. Tempting, Ethan admitted, squeezing her hand. But Sarah would track us down. She has resources. True. And I'm pretty sure Jake already told everyone anyway. Definitely told everyone. Ethan took a deep breath. Ready? Not even a little bit. Let's do this anyway. The moment they walked through the door, hand in hand, conversation stopped. 6 faces turned toward them with expressions ranging from delight to knowing satisfaction to poorly suppressed glee. Sarah actually clapped her hands together like a child on Christmas morning. I knew it, she crowed, practically bouncing. I told you all, didn't I tell you? You've been telling us for approximately 5 years, Marcus said dryly. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. Rude. I'm choosing to ignore you because I'm too happy right now. Sarah rushed forward, pulling both Ethan and Lena into an enthusiastic hug that threatened to cut off circulation. This is the best thing that's happened all year, possibly all decade. It's only April, Tom pointed out. Still counts. Sarah released them, her eyes suspiciously bright. I'm just so happy for you guys. You deserve this. You deserve each other. The sentiment delivered with such genuine warmth made Ethan's chest tighten with emotion. He'd been so focused on his own fear and uncertainty that he hadn't fully considered how their friends might react. Not with judgment or awkwardness, but with joy for both of them. Thanks, Sarah, he managed, his voice rougher than intended. Jake approached next, wearing a grin that suggested he had entirely too many thoughts he was barely restraining from voicing. So, you two, finally, Lena confirmed, leaning into Ethan's side in a way that still felt thrilling and new. I have so many questions. I'm sure you do. Starting with, how did this happen? I mean, I was there for the bonfire, but what happened after? Did you talk? Did you just start making out? Jake, Marcus interrupted, maybe give them 30 seconds before the full interrogation? Fine. Jake held up his hands in surrender. But we're circling back to this. I need details for my best man speech. Presumptuous, Ethan said. Accurate, Jake countered. They settled into the familiar chaos of game night, though the dynamic had shifted in subtle ways that everyone was clearly trying to navigate. Sarah kept shooting them fond glances. Marcus made a few pointed comments about finally getting their act together that held more affection than sarcasm. Tom and his girlfriend Rachel, who'd only been to a few of these gatherings and was still figuring out the group dynamics, watched with poorly concealed fascination. The games proceeded as usual, a heated round of code names that devolved into an argument about whether bank could reasonably relate to both river and money, followed by a collaborative board game that required more strategy than their collective beer consumption allowed for. But throughout it all, Ethan was hyper-aware of Lena's presence beside him in a way that was both familiar and entirely new. She sat closer than usual, their thighs pressed together on Jake's battered couch. Her hand found his during a particularly tense moment in the game, fingers threading together automatically. When she laughed at one of Marcus's terrible jokes, she leaned into Ethan's shoulder, and he felt the contact all the way through his bones. The casual intimacy of it, being able to touch her freely, to pull her closer without second-guessing himself, to press a kiss to her temple just because he wanted to, felt like a gift he was still learning to accept. "You two are disgustingly cute," Sarah observed during a break between games. "It's actually offensive how natural this looks." "It feels natural," Lena said simply, her fingers playing with Ethan's, "like we've been doing it forever." "In a way, you have been," Tom pointed out. "You've been basically dating for years. You just finally made it official." The observation landed with surprising weight. Ethan thought about all the ways he and Lena had been in a relationship without acknowledging it. The constant communication, the emotional intimacy, the way they'd prioritized each other above other potential romantic partners without even realizing it. They'd built something substantial over 7 years of friendship, and now they were simply adding physical intimacy to a foundation that was already solid. "Fair point," he conceded, "though I maintain I was completely oblivious to the dating part." "We know," Jake said. "We all know. We watched you be oblivious for 7 years. It was painful. Why didn't anyone say anything?" "We tried," Sarah said gently. "Remember when I asked if you'd ever considered dating Lena?" Ethan did remember. A conversation maybe 3 years ago, shortly after his breakup with someone whose name he could barely recall now. He'd dismissed the suggestion immediately, citing the importance of their friendship and the risks of ruining a good thing. Sarah had let it drop, but her expression had suggested she knew something he didn't. "I thought you were crazy," he admitted. "I thought there was no way Lena would ever see me like that." "And I thought the same thing about you," Lena added. "We were both idiots." "Agreed," Marcus said, "but you're our idiots, so we're stuck with you." The conversation shifted to other topics. Jake's latest dating disaster involving a woman who'd brought her parrot to their dinner date, Sarah's frustration with her boss, Marcus's upcoming vacation plans. The rhythm of their friendship reasserted itself, familiar and comfortable, but now with this new dimension woven through it. Ethan and Lena as a couple, not just as individuals who happened to always be together. As the night wore on and beer bottles accumulated on Jake's coffee table, the questions became more pointed. It was Rachel, ironically, who asked what everyone else was clearly thinking. "So what's the plan here?" she said, her tone genuinely curious rather than intrusive. "Are you guys taking it slow, moving in together, getting married tomorrow?" "Jesus, Rachel," Tom muttered. "What? I'm just asking what everyone's wondering." Lena laughed, though Ethan felt her tense slightly against his side. "We're figuring it out as we go. We've been actually together for less than a week. There's no rush." "But you've also been building toward this for 7 years," Sarah pointed out. "That's not exactly starting from scratch." "True," Ethan agreed, "but we're still trying to navigate what this relationship looks like, what changes and what stays the same, how to be romantic partners while maintaining the friendship that's always been our foundation." "That's very mature and thoughtful," Jake said. "Also boring. I want dramatic declarations and reckless decisions." "You've had enough dramatic declarations for one lifetime," Marcus said. "Remember when you proposed to Amanda after dating for 3 weeks? We don't talk about Amanda. You brought up reckless decisions." The banter continued, familiar and grounding, and Ethan felt some of his earlier tension ease. This was still his friend group, his chosen family. Lena being his girlfriend didn't fundamentally alter the dynamics they'd all carefully built over years. It just added another layer of complexity to navigate, and maybe, based on the warmth and acceptance flowing around the room, a layer of joy. They left Jake's house around midnight, stepping out into the cool Portland night. The rain had stopped earlier, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the glow of streetlights. Ethan's car was parked 2 blocks away, and they walked in comfortable silence, hands still linked, processing the evening. "That went better than I expected," Lena said finally. "Were you worried?" "A little. Not about them being unsupportive, but about things getting weird. About losing the ease we've always had with the group. I don't think we have to worry about that." Ethan pulled her closer, tucking her against his side. "They're happy for us. And more importantly, they're not going to let us get away with any dramatic bullshit." "True." Sarah would stage an intervention. Marcus would give us a lecture on emotional intelligence. Jake would make inappropriate jokes until we sorted ourselves out. They reached his car, but neither of them moved to get in. Instead, Lena turned to face him, her back against the passenger door, her hand sliding up to rest on his chest. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I'm really happy, like scary happy. The kind of happy that makes me worried I'm going to jinx it by acknowledging it out loud." Ethan understood the feeling completely. The past week had been so good, better than he'd dared to hope. That part of him kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for reality to intrude and reveal that this couldn't actually work. But another part of him, growing stronger each day, believed they could build something real and lasting. "We're not going to jinx it," he said, with more confidence than he felt. "We're just going to keep being honest with each other, keep communicating, keep choosing this every day." "Every day?" she echoed. "I like the sound of that." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, tasting like the beer she'd been drinking and something uniquely her. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Take me home?" Lena asked. "Your place or mine?" "Yours? I like your bed better." "My bed is terrible. The mattress is like 7 years old and probably needs replacing." "But you're in it. That makes it better." The simple statement did something complicated to Ethan's chest. He kissed her again, trying to pour everything he felt but couldn't quite articulate into the contact. Then he opened her door, waited for her to settle in, and drove them back to his apartment through Portland's quiet streets. The following week settled into a new rhythm that was both thrilling and surprisingly comfortable. Ethan found himself rearranging his life in small ways to accommodate Lena's presence, clearing drawer space in his dresser, keeping her favorite coffee creamer stocked, adjusting his morning routine to account for shared bathroom time. She did the same at her place, creating space for him in ways both literal and metaphorical. They had their first argument on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks into officially dating. It started over something small, Ethan canceling plans last minute because of a work crisis, and escalated into a larger conversation about expectations and communication. Lena's voice got tight in that way that meant she was fighting tears. Ethan's jaw clenched with frustration at being misunderstood. "I'm not trying to blow you off," he said, pacing her living room. "I'm trying to meet a deadline that could determine whether I get promoted. I thought you'd understand that." "I do understand that," Lena shot back. "What I don't understand is why you waited until 30 minutes before we were supposed to meet to tell me. Why you didn't communicate earlier that work was getting intense and we might need to reschedule." "I was trying to make it work. I was trying to do both. And instead you did neither effectively. You stressed yourself out trying to make an impossible deadline, and you left me sitting at a restaurant alone for 20 minutes before I got your text." The image of Lena waiting for him, checking her phone, wondering if he was coming, it cut through his defensiveness like a knife. "God, Lena, I'm sorry. I didn't think about... I was so focused on work that I didn't consider how it would feel on your end. That's the problem." Her voice was softer now, the anger draining into hurt. "You got so caught up in your own stress that you forgot we're supposed to be a team now, that your decisions affect me too." Ethan stopped pacing, the truth of her words settling over him. This was the shift he was still learning to navigate, the difference between being responsible only for himself and being accountable to someone else, between operating as an individual and functioning as half of a partnership. "You're right," he admitted, sinking onto her couch. I'm used to making decisions based only on what I need. I'm still learning to factor you into the equation. Lena sat beside him, close but not touching. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just need you to communicate with me. If work is overwhelming, tell me. If you need to cancel, give me more notice. Don't leave me guessing about where I stand. I won't. I promise. He reached for her hand, relieved when she let him take it. This is new territory for me. Being considerate of someone else's time and feelings in this way. I'm going to mess up sometimes, but I'm trying to be better. I know you are. She leaned into him, her head finding his shoulder. I'm still learning too. How to ask for what I need instead of just accommodating whatever you decide. How to voice when I'm hurt instead of swallowing it down. They sat in silence for a while, the tension slowly dissipating. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, the sound familiar and soothing. Ethan thought about all the fights he'd had with previous girlfriends. The defensiveness, the inability to truly hear criticism, the tendency to shut down rather than engage. This felt different. Harder in some ways because Lena's opinion mattered so much more, but also easier because they had 7 years of friendship teaching them how to communicate even when it was uncomfortable. I really am sorry, he said finally, not just for tonight, but for not considering your feelings. You deserve better than that. Thank you for hearing me. Lena lifted her head to look at him, and for not getting defensive when I called you out. I was a little defensive. You were, but you worked through it. That matters. They ordered pizza and spent the rest of the evening talking through expectations, about communication, about time together versus time apart, about how to navigate conflicts when they inevitably arose again. It wasn't romantic or exciting, but it was necessary. The foundation they were building required more than just attraction and history. It required honest conversation about the hard stuff, the boring logistics of two lives becoming intertwined. As spring deepened into early summer, their relationship found its footing. They fell into patterns that worked: Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, Tuesday nights cooking dinner together, weekend hikes in the gorge when the weather cooperated. Lena's toothbrush took up permanent residence in Ethan's bathroom. His coffee mug became a fixture on her kitchen counter. Their friends adjusted to the new dynamic with varying degrees of grace. Sarah delighted in coupledom, constantly suggesting double dates and making knowing comments about their future. Jake made jokes that walked the line between funny and inappropriate until Lena learned to shut him down with a single look. Marcus offered surprisingly thoughtful advice about maintaining individual identity within a relationship, drawn from his own experiences. But for all the external adjustments, the most significant changes were internal. Ethan found himself thinking in terms of we instead of I, considering Lena's preferences when making weekend plans, consulting her about job opportunities, imagining her in future scenarios without it feeling presumptuous or terrifying. The walls he'd built around his heart, carefully constructed over years of protecting himself from being hurt, were coming down brick by brick. The realization that he was falling in love, truly, deeply, irrevocably in love, came not in a dramatic moment, but in a series of quiet ones. Lena laughing at her own joke while making breakfast, her hair still messy from sleep. The way she'd absently reach for his hand while they walked. Her fierce defense of him when someone at a party made a dismissive comment about his job. The thoughtful gifts she gave him. Not expensive things, but meaningful ones that showed she paid attention to the details of who he was. He'd whispered the words once in the darkness of his bedroom while she slept. But saying them when she could hear, when they required reciprocation or at least acknowledgement, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump. The opportunity came on a Saturday in June, 2 months into their relationship. They'd driven out to Cannon Beach for the day, walking along the shoreline and dodging waves while tourists took pictures of Haystack Rock. Lena had brought a kite, a ridiculous rainbow-colored thing she'd found at a thrift store, and they'd spent an hour trying to get it airborne with mixed success and maximum laughter. Now they sat on a blanket, sharing a bag of saltwater taffy from one of the shops on the main street, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The beach was emptying out as families packed up their gear and headed back to hotels and vacation rentals. Gulls wheeled overhead, their calls mixing with the constant rhythm of waves. This was perfect, Lena said, her shoulder pressed against his. Thank you for suggesting it. You suggested it, Ethan pointed out. I just agreed enthusiastically. Then thank you for agreeing enthusiastically. She popped a piece of taffy in her mouth, then held one out for him. Cherry or lemon? Cherry. She fed it to him, her fingers brushing his lips in a way that sent warmth spreading through his chest. These small intimacies still thrilled him, even after 2 months. Maybe especially after 2 months because he'd stopped taking them for granted and started recognizing them as the gifts they were. Can I ask you something? Lena said, her tone shifting to something more serious. Of course. Are you happy? Like, really happy? Not just content or comfortable, but actually happy? The question caught him off guard. He turned to look at her fully, taking in the vulnerability in her expression, the way she was trying to appear casual while asking something that clearly mattered deeply. I'm happier than I've been in years, he said honestly. Maybe ever. Why are you asking? Because sometimes I look at you and I can't tell if you're happy or just going along with this because you feel like you should. She picked at the edge of the blanket, not meeting his eyes. I know you were scared at the beginning. I know this wasn't something you chose so much as something that happened to you. And I guess I worry that you're still trying to convince yourself it's what you want. Her words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed just how much uncertainty she'd been carrying, how much of her own fear she'd been hiding beneath the confidence she projected. Lena, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. I need you to hear this and believe it. What we have, this relationship, this life we're building together, it's not something I'm enduring or convincing myself to want. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. You mean that? I mean it. He took her hand, threading their fingers together. You're right that I was scared at the beginning, terrified actually. But that fear was about change, about disrupting the comfortable life I'd built. It wasn't about you or about us. And now? Now I'm still scared sometimes, but it's a different kind of fear. I'm scared of losing this. Scared of doing something stupid that might hurt you, scared that I'm not capable of being the partner you deserve. He paused, gathering his courage. But I'm not scared of how I feel anymore. I'm not trying to convince myself of anything. I'm just happy. You make me happy. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, catching the golden light of the setting sun. You make me happy too. So happy it scares me. Then we can be scared together. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. And we can be happy together, both things at once. She curled into him, her head finding the space between his shoulder and neck that seemed designed specifically for her. They sat like that as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The beach was nearly empty now, just a few scattered groups and a dog chasing seagulls in the distance. I love you, Ethan said, the words coming out easier than he'd expected. I'm in love with you. I have been for a while now, I think. Maybe longer than I've been willing to admit, even to myself. Lena went very still against him. Then she pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt or uncertainty. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because her smile was radiant despite the tears streaming down her face. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you for so long that I barely remember what it felt like not to love you. He kissed her then, tasting salt from her tears and sweetness from the taffy, pouring 7 years of friendship and 2 months of learning to be together and all his hopes for the future into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning like idiots, the sun had touched the horizon, setting the ocean on fire with reflected light. We should probably head back soon, Lena said, though she made no move to stand. It's a long drive. Probably, Ethan agreed, equally stationary. Or we could get a hotel room, stay overnight, watch the sunrise tomorrow morning. That's very spontaneous of you. I'm trying something new, being spontaneous, taking chances, going with my feelings instead of overthinking everything. I like this new version of you. She kissed him again, quick and sweet. Let's stay. They found a small bed and breakfast a few blocks from the beach, a charming place with weathered shingles and flower boxes in every window. The owner, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a knowing smile, didn't comment on their lack of luggage or their obvious happiness. She just handed them a key to a room on the second floor and told them breakfast started at 8. The room was small but perfect, with a view of the ocean and a bed covered in a wedding ring quilt that had clearly been hand-stitched. They stood at the window for a long time, watching the last light fade from the sky and stars begin to emerge, still processing the weight of words finally spoken. "I can't believe we're here," Lena said softly. "After everything. After 7 years of me loving you silently and you being oblivious and all the waiting and hoping, we're actually here, together, in love." "It feels surreal," Ethan admitted. "Like I'm going to wake up and discover it was all a dream, that I'm still sitting at Jake's bonfire trying to figure out what your confession meant." "It's real." She turned to face him, her hands sliding up to rest on his chest. "We're real. This, what we have, what we're building, it's real and solid and worth every moment of waiting." He believed her. Standing in that small room with the ocean whispering beyond the window and Lena looking at him like he'd given her the world when really she'd given him everything, Ethan believed in the possibility of happiness. Not the safe, comfortable contentment he'd been settling for his entire adult life, but real joy, messy and terrifying and absolutely worth it. They made love that night with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes, learning each other's bodies the way they'd learned each other's hearts over years of friendship. It wasn't perfect or particularly graceful, but it was honest and real, and theirs. Afterwards, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled faintly of lavender, Ethan felt something settle in his chest that had been restless since he could remember. Peace. Contentment. The bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "What are you thinking about?" Lena murmured against his shoulder. "How I almost missed this. How, if you hadn't been brave enough to speak up at that bonfire, I might have gone my whole life being too comfortable to recognize what was right in front of me. But I did speak up, and you listened, and here we are." "Here we are," he echoed, pressing a kiss to her hair. They fell asleep to the sound of waves and woke to sunlight streaming through the window, painting everything gold. True to their promise, they walked back down to the beach to watch the sunrise, standing hand in hand as the sky transformed from navy to pink to brilliant blue. This was happiness, Ethan realized. Not the absence of fear or uncertainty, but the presence of someone worth being brave for. Not the guarantee of a perfect future, but the choice to build one together, day by day, moment by moment. The drive back to Portland was quiet and comfortable, both of them content to simply exist in each other's presence. As the city skyline came into view, familiar and welcoming, Ethan felt the future opening up before him in a way it never had before. Not as something to be managed and controlled, but as something to be embraced and explored together. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. And that was enough. The months that followed their weekend at Cannon Beach unfolded with a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and deeply settled. Summer gave way to fall, Portland's streets turning golden with maple leaves, and the air taking on that crisp quality that made every breath feel cleaner. Ethan and Lena's relationship deepened in ways that surprised him, not with dramatic gestures or sweeping changes, but through the accumulation of small moments that built something sturdy and real. They had their first real test in August when Lena was offered a promotion that would require extensive travel. She'd come to his apartment on a Thursday evening, her expression caught between excitement and anxiety, and laid out the opportunity while they stood in his kitchen. Senior art director, 30% salary increase, projects with major national clients, and 6 months of heavy travel to oversee implementations across the West Coast. "It's everything I've been working toward," she said, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. "But the timing is terrible. We've only been together 4 months and now I'd be gone 3 weeks out of every month." Ethan's first instinct was panic, the old fear of abandonment, of things changing beyond his control, of losing what he'd only just found. But he forced himself to breathe through it, to remember that love wasn't about holding on so tightly that you crushed what you were trying to protect. "What do you want to do?" he asked carefully. "I want both things. I want the job and I want us. But I'm terrified I can't have both without one of them suffering. Do you want the job?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Then take it. He set down his own mug and pulled her into his arms. We'll figure out the rest. She pulled back to look at him, searching his face. You're sure? You're not just saying that because you think it's what I want to hear? I'm saying it because it's true. Lena, you've been working toward this for years. I'm not going to be the person who holds you back from your dreams. We're strong enough to handle a few months of long distance. Are we? The vulnerability in her voice cut straight through him. We've been best friends for 7 years. We've built something solid. A few months apart isn't going to break that. He hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. Besides, absence makes the heart grow fonder and all that romantic crap. She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. When did you become the optimistic one in this relationship? Since I realized I have something worth being optimistic about. Lena took the job. The first time she left for a 3-week stint in San Francisco, Ethan drove her to the airport and kissed her goodbye with a lump in his throat he refused to acknowledge. The apartment felt too quiet without her, his routine suddenly hollow without her presence woven through them. He found himself reaching for his phone constantly, sending her photos of mundane things. His coffee that morning, a funny sign he'd seen on his commute, the sunset from his office window. She responded with her own stream of consciousness. Snapshots of the Golden Gate Bridge, complaints about hotel pillows, random observations about San Francisco pigeons being more aggressive than Portland pigeons. They video chatted every night, sometimes for hours, sometimes just long enough to see each other's faces and say goodnight. I miss you, she said one night, her face pixelated on his phone screen, but her longing unmistakable. I miss you too. How's the project going? Good. Stressful. The client keeps changing their mind about color schemes. She shifted, and he could see she was lying in bed, her hair spread across a white hotel pillow. Tell me about your day. Something normal. I need normal. So he told her about the meeting that could have been an email, about Marcus's latest dating disaster, about the barista at their coffee shop who'd asked where she'd been. Small, ordinary details that somehow felt monumental because they were sharing them across 400 miles of distance. I can't wait to come home, Lena said when he'd run out of mundane updates. 2 more weeks. 13 days, but who's counting? Definitely not me, Ethan lied, and they both laughed. The distance was hard, but it also taught them things they might not have learned otherwise. How to communicate when physical presence wasn't an option. How to maintain intimacy through words and trust when touch was impossible. How to support each other's individual growth while nurturing what they were building together. When Lena finally came home after that first trip, Ethan picked her up at the airport with flowers, something he'd never done for anyone in his life. She dropped her suitcase the moment she saw him and launched herself into his arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. They stood there in baggage claim, holding each other while travelers streamed around them, and Ethan thought maybe they really were strong enough to handle anything. Never leave me for 3 weeks again, he murmured against her hair. Can't promise that. I have 2 more trips this month. Then I'm coming with you next time. You have work. I have vacation days and a laptop. I can work remotely for a week. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright. You'd do that? I do a lot of things for you, including endure San Francisco traffic and overpriced coffee. The coffee's actually pretty good. Heresy. Portland coffee is superior, and you know it. They fell back into their rhythm with surprising ease, though now it included regular periods of separation. Ethan did join her for 1 week in Seattle, working from coffee shops while she was in meetings, exploring the city together in the evenings. It wasn't perfect. He missed his own space, his own routines, but being with her made the disruption worthwhile. The travel schedule eased up in October, and they settled into something more sustainable. Lena was gone 1 week a month instead of 3, which felt manageable. Ethan had gotten promoted at his own job, which brought new responsibilities but also more flexibility. They learned to make the most of the time they had together while maintaining their individual lives and ambitions. It was during one of Lena's home weeks, on a rainy Saturday in late October, that things shifted again. They were at her apartment, ostensibly organizing her closet, but mostly just making piles of clothes and getting distracted by memories attached to various items. Lena pulled out a sweater and held it up with a grimace. I bought this for our camping trip 3 years ago, the one where it rained the entire time. The trip I planned, and everyone gives me hell about. To be fair, it was a disaster. A memorable disaster. True. She tossed the sweater in the donate pile. But I kept this sweater for 3 years because it reminded me of that trip, of sitting in your tent playing cards while everyone else was miserable in their own tents, of you giving me your dry sleeping bag and pretending you didn't mind sleeping in the wet one. Ethan remembered that trip differently now, through the lens of hindsight that revealed what he'd been too blind to see at the time. The way Lena had looked at him when he'd offered her the sleeping bag. The careful distance she'd maintained between them in the tent, respecting boundaries he hadn't even known were important. The quiet intimacy of those card games, just the two of them while rain drummed against fabric walls. I would have given you anything, he said quietly. Even then, I just didn't understand why. I know. She moved closer, her hand finding his. That's what made it so hard. You treated me like I was precious without realizing that's what you were doing. You made me feel seen and valued and important, and then you'd go date someone else and I'd have to watch. The old guilt rose in his chest. I'm sorry for all those years, for every time I hurt you without knowing it. Don't be, Lena squeezed his hand. Those years led us here. Every relationship you had taught you something about what you wanted. Every time I had to watch you with someone else made me stronger, made me more certain of my own feelings. We needed that time. Still feels like I wasted so much of it being oblivious. Nothing's wasted if it teaches you something. She pulled him toward the bed, abandoning the closet project entirely. Besides, we're here now. That's what matters. They lay together in the afternoon dimness, rain pattering against the windows, their conversation drifting to future plans. Ethan found himself talking about things he'd never discussed with anyone. The house he imagined owning someday. The kind of father he hoped to be. The version of himself he was still working to become. Lena listened with the patience she'd always shown him, asking questions that pushed him to think deeper, offering perspectives that challenged his assumptions. What about you? He asked eventually. What does your future look like? Honestly? It looks like this. Like us. Like building a life with someone who sees me and chooses me and pushes me to be better. She traced patterns on his chest, her touch absent and grounding all at once. I want the career, obviously. I want to keep growing professionally, taking on bigger projects, maybe starting my own design firm eventually. But I also want the relationship, the partnership, the shared life. Kids? Eventually, maybe, if we decide it's right for us. She looked up at him. Is that something you want? I think so. Not now, but someday. With the right person. He paused. With you. The conversation should have felt heavy, premature, too serious for only 6 months of dating, but it didn't. It felt like another piece clicking into place, another layer of foundation being laid. They'd been friends for 7 years before becoming romantic partners. Discussing the future didn't feel presumptuous. It felt inevitable. November brought Thanksgiving and the complicated navigation of families. Ethan's mother had moved to Arizona after his father's death, remarrying a retired teacher and building a new life in the desert. Lena's parents lived in Eugene, still in the house where she'd grown up. They'd spent previous Thanksgivings separately, dividing time between their respective families. This year felt different. Come with me to Eugene, Lena said one evening while they were cooking dinner. Meet my parents, officially. As my boyfriend, not just my friend they've heard about for years. The prospect terrified him. Meeting parents as a boyfriend carried weight that meeting them as a friend never had. It meant being evaluated, judged, found either worthy or wanting. It meant their relationship moving to a new level of seriousness that couldn't be walked back. Are you sure they're ready for that? He asked, stalling. Are you ready for that is what you mean? Lena set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to face him. Ethan, we've been together for 6 months. We've said we love each other. We're talking about futures and possibilities. Meeting my parents is a natural next step. What if they hate me? They won't hate you. They'll probably love you, which might actually be worse because my mother will start planning our wedding before we've even finished dessert. That's not helping. Sorry, she softened, moving into his space. I know it's scary, but they're important to me, and you're important to me, and I want those parts of my life to connect. Please? He couldn't deny her anything when she asked like that, with her eyes bright and hopeful and her vulnerability on full display. Okay, but if your dad intimidates me with shotgun cleaning or whatever fathers are supposed to do, I'm blaming you. My dad is a high school English teacher who cries at Pixar movies. You'll be fine. Thanksgiving in Eugene was both exactly as terrifying and exactly as wonderful as Ethan had feared. Lena's parents, Robert and Diana Brooks, welcomed him with warmth that felt genuine rather than performative. Her father did indeed cry during their post-dinner viewing of an animated film, and her mother did indeed make several pointed comments about grandchildren that Lena deflected with practiced ease. But it was a quiet moment on Thursday evening, helping Robert wash dishes while the women were in the living room, that shifted something fundamental for Ethan. Lena's told us a lot about you over the years, Robert said, passing him a wet plate to dry. Though she told us a lot more about you in the past 6 months than she did in the 7 years before that. I imagine the context changed. That it did. Robert was quiet for a moment, methodically washing silverware. She's loved you for a long time, you know. Longer than you've known, I'd wager. The directness caught Ethan off guard. She told you? A father can tell. The way she talked about you, the way her voice changed when your name came up in conversation, the way she'd come home from visiting Portland and be simultaneously happy and heartbroken. Robert looked at him then, his expression serious but not unkind. I watched my daughter love you from a distance for years, watched her be patient and brave and hopeful, even when there was no guarantee you'd ever see her the way she saw you. Ethan's throat tightened with emotion. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I hurt her, even unintentionally. Don't apologize to me, but do understand what she's given you, not just her love now, but her faith in you for all those years. That kind of devotion is rare. It should be treasured. I do treasure it. I treasure her. Good. Robert handed him the last dish. Because if you break her heart, I know where you live. And I have tenure, which means I have job security even if I commit mild acts of violence. The threat was delivered so mildly that it took Ethan a moment to register it. Then Robert smiled, the same warm smile Lena had inherited, and clapped him on the shoulder. But I don't think you will. I think you're exactly the kind of man my daughter deserves. Someone who sees her worth and rises to meet it. They drove back to Portland late Sunday afternoon, Ethan's car packed with leftover pie and containers of Diana's cooking. Lena dozed against the passenger window, exhausted from 3 days of family intensity. Watching her sleep, Ethan thought about Robert's words, about devotion and faith and treasuring what had been freely given. He was falling deeper in love with her with each passing day. The realization should have scared him, that level of emotional investment, that degree of vulnerability. But instead it felt like coming home. Like finally understanding what all those love songs and romantic movies had been trying to express. December arrived with holiday preparations and year-end work chaos. Ethan found himself stressed by deadlines and expectations, the pressure of closing out the year strong for his newly elevated position. He came home late most evenings, distracted and short-tempered, barely present even when he was physically there. It was Lena who finally called him on it, cornering him in his apartment on a Friday night when he'd snapped at her for the 3rd time over something inconsequential. Okay, stop. She stood in front of him, hands on hips, her expression firm. What's actually going on? And don't tell me it's just work stress because you've been stressed before and you didn't take it out on me. I'm not taking it out on you. You just yelled at me for moving your laptop. I didn't yell. He stopped himself, hearing the defensiveness in his voice. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm being an asshole. Yes, you are. Now tell me why. Ethan sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. Everything feels like too much right now. Work is demanding, the holidays are stressful, and I feel like I'm failing at everything. Like I'm not good enough at my job, not present enough in our relationship, not keeping up with basic adult responsibilities. Lena sat beside him, her anger melting into concern. Why didn't you tell me you were feeling overwhelmed? Because I'm supposed to handle it. I'm supposed to be strong and capable and not fall apart over normal life stress. Says who? I don't know, society, masculinity, my own stupid brain. Well, society and masculinity and your stupid brain are all wrong. She took his hand, forcing him to look at her. You're allowed to struggle, Ethan. You're allowed to admit when things are hard. That's not weakness, it's honesty. I don't want you to think I can't handle things. I don't think that. I think you're human. I think you're under a lot of pressure, and instead of asking for support, you're trying to shoulder everything alone. She squeezed his hand. Let me help. That's what partners do. We carry things together. The simple offer broke something open in his chest. He'd spent so long being self-sufficient, so determined to never need anyone, that he'd forgotten how to accept help when it was offered. But Lena was right. Partnership meant sharing burdens, not just joys. I don't even know what help looks like, he admitted. How about we start with you telling me when you're stressed instead of bottling it up? And maybe we order dinner instead of you feeling obligated to cook. And you take tomorrow off from all responsibilities and just rest? I have deadlines. The deadlines will still be there on Monday. You need a break. She was right. He was running himself ragged, trying to be perfect at everything and succeeding at nothing. Okay, tomorrow we do nothing. Absolutely nothing, she agreed. We sleep late, we watch terrible movies, we eat junk food, and we do not think about work or obligations or anything stressful. They did exactly that. Saturday passed in a blur of pajamas and bad television and takeout Chinese food. Ethan felt the tension slowly leaving his shoulders, the constant buzz of anxiety quieting to something manageable. Lena didn't try to fix anything or solve his problems. She just sat beside him, present and patient, occasionally making sarcastic comments about the quality of the movies they were watching. By Sunday morning, he felt almost human again. They were drinking coffee in bed, Lena reading on her phone while he just enjoyed the quiet, when she said something that shifted his entire perspective. You know what I love most about us? My stunning good looks? Besides that, she set down her phone. I love that we don't have to be perfect for each other. I love that I can see you at your worst, stressed and snappy and struggling, and my love doesn't diminish. If anything, it grows stronger because you trust me enough to let me see those parts of you. The observation settled over him like a warm blanket. She was right. He'd spent his whole life trying to be perfect for people, maintaining a careful facade of having everything together. But with Lena, he could just be himself, flawed and struggling and human, and she loved him anyway. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Stop that. You absolutely deserve me. We deserve each other. That's the whole point. Christmas came with its own challenges and joys. They spent Christmas Eve with Ethan's mother in Arizona, making the long drive south and navigating the slight awkwardness of her new husband and new life. Christmas Day was back in Portland with their friend group, a chaotic gathering at Jake's house that involved too much food and a gift exchange that devolved into chaos when someone suggested they play White Elephant. Ethan had agonized over Lena's gift for weeks, wanting it to be meaningful without being too much. He'd finally settled on a vintage camera he'd found at an estate sale, a Pentax K1000, the same model she'd mentioned once, months ago, that her grandfather had used. He'd had it professionally cleaned and serviced, and he'd included 3 rolls of black and white film. She opened it on Christmas morning, just the two of them in his apartment before heading to Jake's, and the look on her face made every moment of searching worth it. Ethan, her voice broke on his name. How did you even remember I mentioned this? I remember everything you tell me. Apparently I've been doing that for 7 years without realizing why. She was crying now, cradling the camera like it was precious. It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole thing is perfect. I'm really not. You're perfect for me. She set the camera carefully aside and launched herself at him, kissing him with a desperation that quickly turned into something else entirely. They arrived at Jake's party 2 hours late, both looking thoroughly disheveled despite their best efforts to appear presentable. Sarah took one look at them and started laughing. Subtle, you two, very subtle. I have no idea what you're talking about, Lena said with as much dignity as she could muster while Ethan's hand rested possessively on her lower back. Sure you don't. That's why Ethan's wearing his shirt inside out. Ethan looked down, realized Sarah was right, and decided he didn't care. Let them laugh. Let them know exactly how happy he was. After years of careful emotional control, of maintaining appropriate distance, of protecting himself from feeling too much, he was finally, gloriously, messily in love. And he wasn't going to apologize for it. The new year arrived with the usual resolutions and fresh starts. Ethan and Lena stood on his apartment balcony at midnight, watching fireworks explode over the city, and he thought about how much had changed in a single year. 12 months ago, Lena had been his best friend, someone he valued but never let himself see as anything more. Now she was his partner, his person, the future he was actively building toward. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "How different everything is. How different I am." "Better different?" "Definitely better." He pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her. "You've made me better. Braver. More honest. More willing to take chances on things that scare me." "You did that yourself. I just gave you a reason." Around them, Portland celebrated with noise and light. But on the balcony, wrapped in each other and in the promise of everything still to come, Ethan felt a peace that had nothing to do with the calendar change and everything to do with the woman in his arms. This was what happiness felt like, he realized. Not the absence of fear or struggle, but the presence of someone who made the fear worthwhile and the struggle bearable. Not perfection, but partnership. Not fireworks every day, but the steady warmth of knowing someone chose you and kept choosing you over and over again. "I love you," he said into the night, into the new year, into the future they were building together. "I love you too," Lena replied, "now and always." And standing there with the city spread out below them and the year stretching ahead full of possibility, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The new year brought with it a clarity that Ethan hadn't expected. January in Portland was typically gray and relentless, the kind of weather that made people question their life choices and dream of warmer climates. But standing in his apartment on a Sunday morning in mid-January, watching Lena make coffee in one of his old t-shirts while humming something off-key, Ethan felt nothing but gratitude for every choice that had led him here. They'd been together for 8 months now, 9 if you counted from the bonfire, which Lena insisted they should. The relationship had settled into something that felt both exciting and comfortable, a balance Ethan hadn't known was possible. They still had their own apartments, their own spaces, but the boundaries between them had blurred considerably. Her toothbrush lived permanently in his bathroom. His favorite mug had taken up residence in her kitchen. They spent more nights together than apart, and the nights they were separated felt strange and incomplete. It was during one of those rare separated nights, lying alone in his bed and staring at the ceiling, that Ethan realized he didn't want to live like this anymore. Not the relationship part, that he wanted with an intensity that still sometimes surprised him. But the 2 apartments, the shuffling back and forth, the inefficiency of maintaining 2 separate lives when they were essentially living one shared existence anyway. The thought should have terrified him. Moving in together was serious, the kind of commitment that came with shared leases and combined furniture and no easy escape route if things went wrong. But Ethan found he wasn't scared. He was ready. More than ready, actually, eager to take the next step, to stop pretending they were still figuring things out when they'd already figured it out months ago. He called Lena the next morning from his office, unable to wait until he saw her that evening. "Hey," she answered, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Miss me already? I just left your place 3 hours ago." "I have a question." "Okay, now you sound serious. Should I be worried?" "No, maybe. I don't know." He was botching this already. "Can we have dinner tonight? Somewhere nice. I want to talk to you about something." The pause on the other end felt endless. "That's a very ominous way to phrase things, Ethan. You're freaking me out." "Don't freak out. It's good." "I think it's good. I hope it's good." He was making it worse. "Just dinner tonight?" "Okay, yes. Our usual Italian place?" "Perfect. 7? I'll be there." They hung up and Ethan immediately texted her. "It's nothing bad. I promise. I'm just terrible at surprises." Her response came back quickly. "You're terrible at a lot of things, communication being one of them. But I love you anyway. Love you too. See you tonight." The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ethan tried to focus on work and failed spectacularly, his mind racing through how to phrase what he wanted to say. Should he be casual about it? Make it a formal proposal? Just blurt it out over appetizers? He'd never done this before. Never wanted to live with someone? Never felt certain enough about a relationship to take that step. By the time he arrived at the restaurant, he'd rehearsed at least 15 different speeches and rejected them all. Lena was already there, sitting at their usual table by the window, wearing a dark green dress he'd never seen before. She looked nervous, her fingers playing with her water glass, and Ethan felt a surge of guilt for making her worry. He slid into the seat across from her and immediately reached for her hand. "Hi." "Hi." She studied his face, searching for clues. "You're making me incredibly anxious with all this mystery." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm bad at this." "Bad at what exactly?" "Romantic gestures, planning things, expressing important thoughts in coherent ways." He took a breath, decided to just jump in. "Move in with me." Lena blinked. "What?" "Move in with me, or I'll move in with you, or we'll find a new place together. I don't care about the logistics. I just know I don't want to keep living separately when we're basically already living together anyway." "That's your big serious conversation?" Relief and amusement warred on her face. "You made it sound like you were going to break up with me." "Why would I break up with you when I'm trying to get you to live with me?" "I don't know. You were being weird and ominous." She laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "I spent all day convinced you were having second thoughts, or had met someone else, or decided you weren't ready for a relationship after all." "Lena," he squeezed her hand, "I am absolutely, completely, 100% ready for this relationship. I'm so ready that I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night and stop maintaining this fiction that we're still taking things slow." "We are taking things slow. We've been together for 8 months. We say I love you daily. We've met each other's families. Your underwear is in my dresser and my shampoo is in your shower. What part of this is slow? The part where we haven't officially lived together yet? Exactly. So let's fix that." He paused, watching her expression. "Unless you're not ready, I don't want to pressure you. If you need more time, I don't need more time." She was smiling now, her eyes bright with something that looked like happiness. "I've been ready since about month 3, but I didn't want to scare you off by suggesting it." "You thought it would scare me off?" "Old habits. I spent 7 years being careful not to push too hard, not to ask for too much. It's hard to break that pattern." Ethan brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then let me be clear. You can push. You can ask. You can tell me what you want and expect me to rise to meet it. That's what we do now. We're partners, equals. No more holding back because you're afraid of my reaction." "Okay." She nodded, her smile widening. "Okay? Then yes. Let's move in together. Let's find a place that's ours, not just yours or mine. Let's do this for real." The relief and joy that flooded through Ethan was so intense he felt momentarily lightheaded. "Yeah? Yeah." She leaned across the table to kiss him, heedless of the other diners. "Let's build a life together, a real one, with shared furniture and arguments about dish duty and all the boring, beautiful domestic stuff." They barely touched their food that night, too busy planning and dreaming and mapping out what their shared life might look like. Lena wanted a place with good natural light for her design work. Ethan wanted enough space for a home office. They both wanted a location that was walkable, close to their favorite coffee shops and restaurants, somewhere that felt like home. The apartment hunting process took 3 weeks and tested their patience in ways Ethan hadn't anticipated. They saw places that were too small, too expensive, too far from everything they cared about. They had their first real argument about priorities. Lena insisting that light and layout mattered more than square footage, Ethan fixated on getting the most space for their budget. "You're being ridiculous," she said, standing in the middle of a perfectly serviceable but utterly charmless 2-bedroom. "This place has zero character. The walls are beige. The carpet is beige. Even the appliances are beige. We'd be living in a beige nightmare. But it's 300 square feet bigger than the last place you loved. The last place I loved had original hardwood floors and windows that actually let in sunlight. This place feels like a corporate hotel. It's practical. It's soul-crushing." She turned to face him fully. "Ethan, we're going to be living here, potentially for years. Don't you want to actually like the space we're in?" He looked around the apartment, trying to see it through her eyes. She was right. It was utterly generic, the kind of place that existed purely for function with no thought to form. And more importantly, Lena cared about this in a way he didn't. Her work was literally design. She understood spatial dynamics and aesthetic impact in ways that he could learn but would never instinctively grasp. "You're right," he said. I'm sorry. I was so focused on the practical aspects that I forgot we actually have to enjoy living there." "Thank you." Her shoulders relaxed. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I just know that environment matters. If we're going to build a life together, I want it to be in a space that feels like us, not just any generic apartment." They found the right place 2 days later. A third-floor walk-up in the Alphabet District, hardwood floors throughout, big windows facing east for morning light, and a small balcony that overlooked a quiet street lined with cherry trees. It was slightly smaller than Ethan had wanted and slightly more expensive than they'd planned, but the moment they walked in, both of them knew. "This is it," Lena breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, already imagining their furniture in the space, their life unfolding within these walls. "This is home." They signed the lease that afternoon and spent the next month coordinating the logistics of combining two households into one. The process was revealing in unexpected ways. Ethan discovered that Lena had strong opinions about thread count and couldn't sleep without white noise. Lena learned that Ethan owned an alarming number of coffee mugs for one person and had somehow accumulated 3 can openers despite never cooking. The actual move happened on a Saturday in March, with help from their long-suffering friend group. Jake and Marcus handled the heavy lifting while Sarah organized and Tom made endless trips up 3 flights of stairs with boxes. Rachel provided pizza and beer, earning herself permanent favorite status in Ethan's book. "I can't believe you two are actually doing this," Sarah said, arranging books on the shelf they'd assembled that morning. "Living together, being domestic, growing up." "We've been grown up for years," Lena pointed out from where she was unpacking kitchen supplies. "You know what I mean? This is like adult, shared leases and joint furniture purchases and coordinating schedules." "Terrifying when you put it like that," Ethan said. "But also kind of perfect," Lena added, catching his eye across the room. The look she gave him was soft and warm and full of promise, and Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion that still sometimes overwhelmed him. After everyone left and the apartment was a disaster of half-unpacked boxes and mismatched furniture, Ethan and Lena collapsed onto their couch, a compromise piece they'd chosen together. Lena's eye for aesthetics combined with Ethan's insistence on comfort. "We did it," Lena said, her head on his shoulder. "We did." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "How does it feel?" "Right. Scary and exciting and completely right." She shifted to look up at him. "How about you? Any regrets?" "Not a single one." They fell into the rhythms of cohabitation with surprising ease. Morning routines synchronized. Lena in the shower while Ethan made coffee, trading spaces seamlessly. Evening patterns emerged, cooking together when they had time, ordering takeout when they didn't, always debriefing their days over dinner. Small conflicts arose and were resolved. Ethan learned to put his dishes directly in the dishwasher instead of leaving them in the sink. Lena discovered she needed to actually tell him when something bothered her instead of expecting him to read her mind. It wasn't perfect. There were mornings when they bickered about whose turn it was to take out the trash, nights when one of them needed space and the other needed connection, requiring negotiation and compromise, moments of frustration when individual habits clashed with shared space. But it was real. And real, Ethan discovered, was so much better than the careful, controlled version of life he'd been living before. Real meant arguments that got resolved through honest conversation. Real meant seeing each other at their absolute worst and choosing to stay anyway. Real meant building something together, day by day, choice by choice. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms painting their street in shades of pink and white. Ethan found himself thinking more and more about the future, about the next steps he wanted to take with Lena. They'd been living together for 2 months and dating for almost a year. By any reasonable timeline, it was too soon to be thinking about marriage. But their timeline had never been conventional. He started looking at rings in April, browsing online late at night when Lena was already asleep. He had no idea what she'd want, classic or modern, simple or elaborate. The options were overwhelming, and he found himself paralyzed by the fear of getting it wrong. It was Marcus, surprisingly, who provided guidance during a lunch meeting that had nothing to do with relationships. "You've been distracted lately," Marcus observed, poking at his salad. Something going on? Just thinking about stuff? Incredibly specific. Very helpful. Ethan hesitated, then figured he might as well be honest. I'm thinking about asking Lena to marry me. Marcus's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Seriously? Yeah, I know it's fast by conventional standards, but we've known each other for almost 8 years. We've been building toward this for a long time. I'm not questioning the timeline. I'm just surprised you're actually ready to take that step. Marcus set down his fork. You were the guy who avoided commitment like it was contagious. Now you're planning proposals. It's a significant shift. She changed me. Or maybe she just made me brave enough to be who I actually wanted to be all along. That's disgustingly romantic. I approve. Marcus leaned back in his chair. So what's the problem? You seem stressed about it. I don't know what kind of ring to get. I don't know how to propose. I don't know if I should do something elaborate or simple or... He stopped himself. I'm overthinking it. Massively overthinking it. Marcus's expression was uncharacteristically gentle. Look, I don't know Lena as well as you do, but from what I've observed, she doesn't care about grand gestures. She cares about honesty, about you being genuine. So whatever you do, make it true to who you are and what your relationship actually is. The advice settled something in Ethan's chest. Marcus was right. Lena had never asked for perfection or performance. She'd asked for honesty. For him to show up and be real, even when real was messy or scared or uncertain. He bought the ring 2 weeks later. Nothing elaborate. A simple platinum band with a single stone, elegant and classic. The jeweler tried to upsell him to something bigger, flashier, but Ethan knew this was right. It was Lena, understated beauty, timeless design, perfect in its simplicity. The question of how to propose consumed him for another week. He considered elaborate plans, taking her back to Cannon Beach, where they'd first said I love you, recreating their first date, doing something dramatic in public. But every scenario felt wrong, like he was trying to live up to some external expectation rather than honoring what they actually were. The answer came on an ordinary Thursday evening in May. They'd been living together for 3 months, and the apartment had truly become their home, a blend of both their aesthetics, filled with accumulated memories and shared routines. Ethan came home from work to find Lena already there, cooking dinner while music played from her phone, dancing slightly as she chopped vegetables. She looked up when he walked in, her face lighting up with the smile she reserved just for him. Hey, you're home early. Left right at 5 for once. How was your day? Good. Busy. I closed that deal with the Seattle client. She was proud. He could hear it in her voice, see it in the set of her shoulders. That's amazing. We should celebrate. We are. I'm making your favorite pasta. He crossed the kitchen to kiss her, tasting tomato sauce and wine and home. And standing there in their kitchen with no fanfare or perfect timing or elaborate planning, Ethan knew this was the moment. Lena. She was already turning back to the stove, adjusting the heat under the sauce. Turn around for a second. Something in his tone made her pause. She turned slowly, her expression shifting from casual to questioning. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's the point. He was fumbling for words, abandoning any script he'd half planned. You're cooking dinner in our kitchen, in our apartment, building our life together. And I realized I don't want there to be any question about our future. I don't want you to wonder if I'm committed or if I'm going to panic and run. I want you to know, absolutely and certainly, that I'm here, that I'm choosing you, that I want to keep choosing you for the rest of my life. Lena's hand had come up to cover her mouth, her eyes wide. Ethan, wait, let me finish. He pulled the ring box from his pocket, where it had been residing for the past week while he worked up the courage. I know we haven't been together that long in the traditional sense, but we've been building this foundation for years, and I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to keep dating or living together or whatever we're calling this. I want to marry you. I want to stand up in front of everyone we love and promise to be your partner, your support, your person for the rest of our lives. He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal the ring. Lena was crying now, tears streaming down her face while she smiled, and Ethan felt his own eyes burning. You stood by a fire 8 months ago and had the courage to speak a truth I'd been too blind to see. You waited for me with a patience I didn't deserve, You pushed me out of my comfort zone and made me braver and better and more honest than I've ever been. And I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm going to mess up and disappoint you and fail to live up to everything you deserve. But I also know that I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. So, Lena Brooks, will you marry me? Will you take this terrified, overthinking, formerly oblivious man and turn him into your husband? Lena was laughing and crying simultaneously, nodding before she could even form words. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. She pulled him up from the floor and kissed him fiercely, then pulled back to look at the ring. It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole thing is perfect. I'm really not. You're perfect for me. That's all that matters. She held out her left hand, trembling slightly, and Ethan slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the evening light from their kitchen window. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other while the pasta sauce simmered forgotten on the stove, and their entire future spread out before them, bright and certain and real. We should probably tell people, Lena said eventually, still staring at her ring like she couldn't quite believe it was there. We should finish cooking dinner first. I'm starving and you've been working on that sauce for an hour. Very romantic, prioritizing food over announcing our engagement. I'm practical. You knew this about me when you said yes. They did finish cooking dinner, though they also couldn't stop touching each other, hands finding hands, stolen kisses, Lena holding up her left hand every few minutes to admire the ring. When they finally sat down to eat, Ethan pulled out his phone. Should we call people individually or just do a group text? Group text feels impersonal for something this big. Agreed, so we call... He stopped as his phone started ringing. Jake's name flashed on the screen. Weird timing, he answered, putting it on speaker. Hey, Jake. Did you propose? Jake's voice was accusatory and excited in equal measure. Marcus said you were planning to propose, and I have been checking my phone obsessively for the past week waiting for news. Marcus has a big mouth. So you did propose, and you didn't call me immediately. I'm wounded, devastated. Lena leaned toward the phone. He proposed about 20 minutes ago, Jake. We were processing. Lena, you said yes, obviously. Obviously. Did you think I'd say no? No, but I wanted to hear it confirmed. Okay, stay on the line. I'm calling everyone else. Before they could protest, Jake had added Sarah, Marcus, and Tom to the call, all of them talking over each other with excitement and demands for details. Lena caught Ethan's eye across the table, shaking her head with fond exasperation, and he grinned back. This was their life now, their chosen family, their support system, the people who'd watched them figure themselves out and cheered them on every step of the way. The conversation devolved into planning mode, Sarah immediately suggesting dates and venues, while Jake argued for a Halloween wedding because it would be iconic. Lena fielded questions with patience while Ethan mostly listened, content to watch her navigate their friend's enthusiasm. When they finally hung up an hour later, their pasta had gone cold, but neither of them cared. They reheated it and ate at midnight, talking about the future in concrete terms now. When to get married, where to have the ceremony, whether to do something small and intimate or larger and celebratory. What do you want? Lena asked. Honestly, not what you think you should want or what would make other people happy. What would make you happy? Ethan thought about it, really considered the question. A year ago, he would have said something small and controlled, limited guest list, nothing too emotional or vulnerable. But he wasn't that person anymore. I want our friends there, he said slowly. I want your parents and my mom and all the people who've supported us. I want it to feel authentic, like us, not like some wedding magazine version of what we're supposed to do. And I want to marry you in a place that means something, not just any venue, because it's available. What place means something to us? They looked at each other, the answer occurring to both of them simultaneously. Jake's backyard, they said in unison. It was perfect. The place where everything had started, where a careless joke had cracked open 7 years of unspoken truth. Where their friend group gathered for all their important moments. Where they'd built the foundation of community that now surrounded and supported them. Do you think Jake will let us take over his backyard for a wedding? Lena asked. I think Jake would be devastated if we didn't ask. They called him back immediately, floating the idea. Jake's response was enthusiastic and immediate. Are you kidding? This is the greatest honor of my life. I'm already planning renovations. We'll build a pergola. String lights everywhere. It's going to be beautiful. Jake, you don't have to renovate your backyard. Too late. I'm already looking at Pinterest. This is happening. They set a date for October, 7 months away, giving them time to plan without the pressure of a rushed wedding. Lena insisted she didn't need a long engagement, and Ethan agreed. They'd already spent 7 years getting to this point. Why wait any longer than necessary? The months leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of decisions and preparations. Lena took charge of most of the aesthetic choices, her design expertise ensuring everything would be beautiful without being fussy. Ethan handled logistics and coordination, his organizational skills put to good use. They argued about the guest list, Lena wanting to keep it small, Ethan realizing he actually wanted to share this moment with more people than he'd initially thought. "Who even are you?" Lena teased when he suggested inviting his entire office. "The man I fell in love with wanted a tiny ceremony with like 10 people." "The man you fell in love with was scared of being vulnerable in front of others. I'm working on that. I like this version of you, the one who's not afraid to let people see him happy." They compromised on 75 guests, family, close friends, a few colleagues who'd become important to both of them. Sarah cried when Lena asked her to be maid of honor. Marcus looked genuinely touched when Ethan asked him to be best man, though he covered it quickly with his usual sarcasm. Jake threw himself into backyard transformation with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found his calling. He consulted with Lena on design, built a wooden arbor for the ceremony, strung what had to be thousands of lights through the trees. By September, his backyard looked like something from a wedding magazine, romantic and magical and perfect. Ethan's mother flew in from Arizona a week before the wedding, bringing her new husband and an alarming number of opinions about ceremony music. Lena's parents arrived from Eugene with enough baked goods to feed the entire guest list twice over. The apartment became a hub of activity and chaos, relatives and friends flowing through at all hours. The night before the wedding, Ethan and Lena broke tradition and spent the evening together at their apartment. They'd considered doing the whole don't see each other before the ceremony thing, but it felt arbitrary and unnecessary given their history. "Nervous?" Lena asked. They were lying in bed, neither of them able to sleep despite the exhaustion of wedding preparation. "Not about marrying you, about the ceremony itself, being the center of attention, having everyone watching us, possibly crying in front of 75 people. You probably will cry. I know, and I've made peace with it." He rolled onto his side to face her. "A year ago, that would have terrified me, being that vulnerable in public. But now I just think, why shouldn't people see how much I love you? Why shouldn't they witness what this means to me? Look at you, being emotionally available and self-aware. You've been a terrible influence. The worst." She kissed him softly. "I love you. I'm so glad you're marrying me tomorrow. I'm glad you waited for me to catch up. Worth every moment." October arrived with perfect autumn weather, clear skies, temperatures in the mid-60s, the kind of day that felt like a gift. Ethan woke early, adrenaline overriding any possibility of sleep. Marcus arrived at 8 with coffee and bagels, taking his best man duties seriously by making sure Ethan actually ate something. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked, watching Ethan attempt to tie his tie for the third time. "Terrified, excited, absolutely certain I'm doing the right thing." "That's probably the best anyone can hope for." Marcus took over the tie tying with practiced efficiency. "For what it's worth, I'm happy for you. You deserve this. Someone who sees you and loves you and pushes you to be better. Lena's good people. The best people." They arrived at Jake's house at 2, the ceremony scheduled for 4. The backyard had been transformed completely. White chairs arranged in neat rows facing the arbor Jake had built, lights already twinkling in the late afternoon sun, flowers everywhere. Guests were starting to arrive, and Ethan greeted them with a calm he didn't entirely feel. At 3:45, Marcus steered him to the front, positioning him under the arbor with Jake, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion and was taking his officiant role very seriously. The string quartet Lena had hired began playing, and guests settled into their seats. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he watched the processional begin. Sarah appeared first, wearing a deep burgundy dress and crying already. Then the music shifted to the song they'd chosen, something modern and romantic that Lena loved, and she appeared at the end of the makeshift aisle on her father's arm. She was stunning. Her dress was simple and elegant, her hair swept up to show her neck, and she was smiling through tears that matched his own. Their eyes locked across the distance, and Ethan felt everything else fade away. The guests, the ceremony, the careful plans. There was just Lena, walking toward him, choosing him, about to promise herself to him for the rest of their lives. When Robert placed Lena's hand in his, Ethan squeezed gently, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. Jake began the ceremony with humor and heart, telling their story. The 7 years of friendship, the bonfire confession, the journey from oblivious best friends to the couple standing before everyone now. "I have known these two for a long time," Jake said, his voice carrying to the assembled guests, "and I have watched them dance around their feelings with the dedication of professional avoiders. But what I've learned watching them finally get their act together is that love isn't always immediate. Sometimes it's built slowly, day by day, choice by choice, until one day you look up and realize the person you've been looking for has been beside you all along." Ethan's throat tightened with emotion. Lena's eyes were swimming with tears, though she was smiling. They'd written their own vows, both of them agreeing that traditional promises didn't quite capture what they wanted to say. Lena went first, her voice steady despite the tears. "Ethan, I have loved you for so long that I barely remember what it felt like not to love you. I loved you when you were just my friend. I loved you when you were dating other people. I loved you when you were completely oblivious to my feelings. And I love you now, standing here about to become my husband. You've taught me that patience is a form of faith, faith that good things come to those who wait, that the right person is worth the uncertainty, that love can exist quietly for years before it finds its voice. I promise to keep choosing you every day. I promise to be honest when honesty is hard. I promise to push you out of your comfort zone because I know that's where you grow. And I promise to build a life with you that honors both who we are now and who we're becoming. I love you. I'm so glad I finally get to say that as your wife." Ethan was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. When Jake nodded at him to begin his vows, it took him a moment to find his voice. "Lena, I was living half a life before you had the courage to speak up at that bonfire. I was comfortable and safe and completely unaware of what I was missing. You could have let me stay in that ignorance. You could have protected yourself and moved on, and found someone who actually saw you from the beginning. But instead, you were brave. You risked our friendship, risked rejection, risked your heart to tell me a truth I desperately needed to hear. And I am standing here today because of that courage, because you believed in us before I did, because you were patient when I was oblivious and honest when I was scared and persistent when I wanted to retreat into old patterns. I promise to be worthy of that faith. I promise to see you, really see you, every single day. I promise to be brave enough to match your courage, honest enough to match your truth, and devoted enough to match your patience. You've made me better in every possible way, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to do the same for you. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for being exactly who you are." By the time he finished, half the guests were crying along with him. Jake had to pause to collect himself before continuing with the ring exchange and the final pronouncement. When he finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Ethan pulled Lena into his arms and kissed her with everything he felt. 7 years of friendship, 8 months of deliberate love, and a lifetime of promise stretching ahead of them. The reception was joyful chaos. Dancing and toasts and laughter, their friends and family celebrating with the kind of genuine happiness that made Ethan's chest ache. Marcus's best man speech was surprisingly heartfelt. Sarah's maid of honor toast made everyone cry again. And Jake's efficient remarks devolved into embarrassing stories that had Lena covering her face with mortification. But the moment Ethan would remember most came late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and just their core group remained. They were sitting around the fire pit, the same fire pit where everything had started. And someone made a joke about the bonfire that had changed everything. "I still can't believe it took a joke proposal to get you two together," Jake said, shaking his head. "All those years of watching you pine," he gestured at Lena, "and you be oblivious. a gesture at Ethan, and it came down to one stupid party game. It wasn't stupid, Lena said softly, her hand finding Ethan's. It was exactly what we needed. Sometimes the universe gives you what you need in the strangest ways. The universe and my extremely good party planning, Jake added. And that, Lena agreed, laughing. Ethan looked around the circle, Jake and Sarah and Marcus and Tom and Rachel and all the people who'd supported them through the awkward transition from friends to something more. The people who'd believed in them even when he hadn't believed in himself. The chosen family who'd created the space for love to grow. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. All of you. For being patient with me while I figured out what you all already knew. For supporting us through every step of this. For being here tonight. We wouldn't be here without you. We know, Marcus said, but his tone was affectionate. You can repay us by naming your firstborn after me. Absolutely not, Lena said immediately. Worth a shot. They sat around that fire until past midnight, talking and laughing and celebrating, the lights Jake had strung through the trees twinkling overhead like stars. And when Ethan and Lena finally left to start their honeymoon, a week in the San Juan Islands that Lena had planned, he felt nothing but gratitude for every moment that had led them here. The joke that had started everything had become a promise fulfilled. The friendship that had sustained them for years had transformed into a partnership that would last a lifetime. And the love that Lena had carried patiently for so long had finally found its home in a man brave enough to receive it. As they drove away from Jake's house, married and happy, and heading toward their future, Ethan reached for Lena's hand and marveled at how a single moment of honesty, a confession spoken by firelight, had rewritten both their lives completely. What are you thinking about? Lena asked, her wedding ring catching the streetlight. How grateful I am that you had the courage to speak up. How different my life would be if you hadn't. How close I came to missing this. Missing us. But you didn't miss it. I spoke up, and you listened, and here we are. Here we are, he echoed. They drove through the quiet Portland streets toward home, toward the life they'd built and the future they'd promised to share. And Ethan knew with absolute certainty that every scared, uncertain, stumbling step had been worth it. Because sometimes love wasn't about fireworks or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it was about patience and courage, and choosing to see what had been right in front of you all along. Sometimes it was about a joke that refused to die, a confession that changed everything, and the beautiful, ordinary miracle of building a life with your best friend.